Chapter 246. The first was that Princess Sicila would smile at him, and she looked so happy. It was completely different from the forced smiles of the concubines around Sinek. Her smile was as natural as a blooming flower. Sinek himself was also a supreme warrior. It was said that the sword he wielded on the battlefield was covered with a layer of bloody light. It could be seen that his murderous aura was very strong. Moreover, he was famous for his brutality. When the concubines saw him, their legs and stomachs would cramp. It was difficult for them to laugh even if they wanted to. The second was that Princess Sicila would get angry at him and express her dissatisfaction. Her anger and dissatisfaction were different from the coldness of Queen Samir. It was a woman's petulance. As an emperor, Sinek had many beauties at his beck and call. But none of his concubines dared to be so petulant with him. She even dared to express her dissatisfaction towards the specially built palace. And Princess Sicila had such a good sense of propriety. Her words just happened to make Sinek happy. Even if Sinek owned the world, it was almost impossible for him to meet a woman like her. He had found a long-lost feeling between a man and a woman. It felt so good. There was only one word to describe Princess Sicila in his arms. Aman and Gilgamesh hoped that Princess Sicila would find a chance to lure Sinek to the wilderness. Little did they expect that the princess would settle the matter as soon as she met the Emperor of Assyria. Princess Sicila didn't ask Sinek when the wedding would be held. She knew that the Emperor would definitely make an announcement. She also didn't suggest the location of the hunting feast. It seemed like the Emperor had decided everything himself. No one would know about it in advance, so naturally, they wouldn't be too cautious. If Sinek really did set up camp in the hunting ground, then he would marry Princess Sicila. The security would be tight. But that was not something that the princess could worry about. If someone wanted to assassinate the emperor, she would have to deal with it herself. She could only pray silently in her heart. The reason why she lured Sinek to the wilderness was that it was impossible to assassinate the emperor in the city. The army of the Assyrian Empire was stationed in the city of Lys, and the area around the palace was the most heavily guarded. Not only were there guards on duty, but there were also court priests who were always on alert. Even if a master could sneak in, the slightest movement would cause them to be surrounded by the army. It would be extremely difficult to escape. If that happened, it would not be an assassination, but a war. Even if they could find an opportunity to attack, the battle between masters could easily hurt innocent civilians. The situation would be out of control. As a god, Amon was also planning to participate in this matter. This was also related to the plan he had discussed with Marduk. He could take this opportunity to show his strength and let Enlil see what he was. Gods were different from mortals and even level 9 oracles. In a sense, they were just a condensation of body and mind, so some of their feelings were different from those of mortals. For the gods, the killing formation of thousands of soldiers and horses was a very special place. Ordinary soldiers seemed vulnerable, but the killing intent of the tens of thousands of soldiers could more or less affect the physical and mental senses of the gods. As for how strong or weak it was, it depended on the morale of the soldiers in the formation. Although the disturbance was very weak and not enough to cause any harm, it had to be taken into account when fighting a master. So the gods would try to avoid such an occasion as much as possible. If it was in the wilderness, the situation would be different. Even if Sineka's security was tight, the hunting ground was just a form of entertainment, not a real war. Sinek could not bring the entire army stationed in the city, so he could only bring the palace guards and the masters around him. Gilgamesh or Amon could only use a surprise attack to end the battle quickly. When the time came, there would inevitably be a fierce battle between the top masters in the world. Sinek was very decisive. The ceremony of conferring the title of Empress was set for 2 days later, and he ordered the preparations to be made immediately. Although the officials of the Imperial Ministry of Interior thought that it might not be in line with the etiquette of the empire, they could not go against Sineka's will. Of course, an emperor had to consider safety when traveling. Someone reminded Sinek to be careful of Amon, because Ammonius first became famous on the continent because of his surprise attack and capture of Hittite King Lucier. Sinek laughed when he heard the words, "Do you think I'm going to let go of that useless Lucier? Besides, How would people know that I'm going to marry Princess Sicila in the hunting ground? You're loyal to your duty, so go and make the arrangements. Cynic was different from Lucier. He was a supreme warrior who had personally led the army and killed countless enemies. Moreover, he decided to hold the ceremony in the hunting ground on the spur of the moment. No one knew about it beforehand, not even he himself. Princess Sicila only made a suggestion. She did not ask Cynic where the hunting feast would be held. However, she knew that the most suitable place for a large group of people to hold the feast would be the Lisi River Valley in the northwest of the city. There were deep mountains connected to the hills, grassy slopes in the valley, and shrubs in the northwest. Deep in the mountains was a primeval forest with lush vegetation and many wild beasts. It had now been designated as the royal hunting ground of Emperor Cynic. The grassy slopes in the valley were perfect for setting up camp. Princess Sicila could even roughly guess where to set up camp. Only an open grassy slope would be the most suitable. Why was she so clear about the situation here? Because the princess's fief was in the city of Lisi. The hunting ground used to belong to her. Years ago, when Gilgamesh sent Humbaba's fangs and tendons to the capital of Babylon, the little duke even invited him to Lisi to hunt. It was in that place. 2 days later, Princess Sicila had changed into her hunting attire. Escorted by the imperial guards, she left the city in a grandiose manner and headed for the hunting grounds. Princess Sicila sat in the carriage, while Cynic rode in front of the procession on a pure black warhorse. The entourage included the important officials in Lisi, many of whom were civil officials. However, to please Cynic, they all changed into warrior attire, except that they did not wear heavy armor. As for the guards, they were of course quite strong. 500 elite imperial guards were dispatched. Not only the supreme warrior Crips, but also 4 supreme warriors of the imperial generals who participated in the hunting. They were the generals of the imperial legions and happened to be in Lisi. Of course, they had to attend the hunting feast of Emperor Cynic. Including Cynic himself, there were 6 supreme warriors in the procession. However, Samir, the most powerful warrior on the continent and Cynica's other queen, was not present. Samir stayed in Lisi and did not participate in the hunting feast. Perhaps she was unhappy, but her reaction was normal. There were also 3 supreme mages in the hunting party. In addition to the court supreme mage White, there was also a chief priest of the Straw League, one of the high priests of the Assyrian kingdom, Diego Jorge, who happened to be in Lisi as well. The most powerful of all the mages was, of course, Faust, the sage of the nation. There were not only warriors in the king's imperial guards, but also a group of court priests. Their duty was not only to protect Emperor Cynic and Empress Sicila, but also to hold the conferring ceremony under Faust's leadership. This group of priests was probably more powerful than a single supreme mage. There were 30 of them, specially trained and equipped with standard staffs. They could form a magic formation to guard against any surprise attack at a critical moment. Their commander used to be White, but today he was replaced by Faust. When the emperor went hunting, the group of priests who accompanied him were also given scrolls. This was also part of their strong fighting power. Scrolls could not be used on a large scale on a battlefield, as they were too expensive and could easily cause accidental injuries in a chaotic battle. However, they were a regular magical item when protecting the emperor, especially in the wilderness. They were perfect for setting up a magic formation and being used in batches. They had all kinds of miraculous offensive and defensive effects. In order to prevent any unexpected situations, Faust had also ordered all the scrolls provided by the group of imperial priests to be stored in his own space ring. If there were any sudden incidents, he could command the priests to immediately set up a formation and use the scrolls in the formation. In the face of such a powerful force, it was simply impossible to assassinate Cynic. It was Princess Sicila who managed to lure Cynic to the hunting ground. But when she saw the formation, she regretted it and even secretly prayed that Gilgamesh would not come. Some people had already set up camp on the grassy slope between the hills. In the middle of the camp was a luxurious leopard skin tent. The tent was like a small palace. The front part of the tent was open, with seats for Cynic and Princess Sicila, and a separate seat for Faust next to it. There were also many tents in front of the tent, forming an open space with tables and cushions. This was where the hunting feast and the conferring ceremony would be held. As for the tent at the back, it would be the bedroom of Cynic and Princess Sicila after their marriage. When the crowd arrived, everything had already been prepared. Cynic was now a man of action, and a large-scale hunting party was about to begin. The emperor rode a warhorse with a longbow in his hand and galloped into the wilderness. His guards flanked him from both sides, neither too far nor too close. Princess Sicila did not ride a horse. She sat in a chariot and followed Cynica's horse from afar, cheering and jumping for joy. The driver was the female giantess, Dammit. Little did Princess Sicila know that the female giantess in front of her was the most powerful being among them. She waved her embroidered handkerchief and shouted, "Your Majesty, be careful." Ever since the great flood in the plains of Duk, monsters have been appearing in the deep mountains here. Cynic laughed and said, "I can't wait for a monster to rush out and kill it myself in front of you." Serving the emperor on a hunting trip was a tough job. Not only did they have to protect His Majesty from being hurt by the beasts, but they also had to let His Majesty have fun and show off his power by killing the beasts. Fortunately, Cynic himself was a supreme warrior. Ordinary beasts could not hurt him at all, which saved him a lot of trouble. In fact, some warriors and priests had already arrived at the forest in front of them. They were hard at work carrying out two tasks. One was to check if there were any assassins lying in ambush in the mountains, and the other was to drive the beasts out of the mountains. Otherwise, the beasts would have been scared away by such a huge commotion in the wilderness. How could Cynic continue his hunt? Cynic was indeed brave. He drove the frightened beasts out of the forest, and his arrows did not miss their target. He killed 5 deer, 3 antelopes, a leopard and 2 bears in a row. The warriors on both sides of him also had their own kills. The grand hunt finally came to an end when the horses were tired and their nostrils were puffing white smoke. The game was transported back to the camp, washed and cooked before being served at the banquet. The tired officials escorted Cynic out of the wilderness and back to the camp. If someone wanted to assassinate Cynic, the most dangerous moment had passed. Most of the guards in charge of security were relieved. It was already afternoon. The ceremony to confer the title of Empress would be held before sunset, followed by a grand bonfire banquet. Princess Sicila sat in her chariot and looked up at the sky. The expression in her eyes was either disappointment or relief. It seemed that the assassin had given up on the plan. Even the princess herself could not tell if she wanted Gilgamesh to come out or not. Just then Ili, who was driving the chariot, suddenly turned his head to the east in the direction of the Lys River. Everyone immediately looked in that direction because they heard the clopping of hooves. It was a strange situation. Unless there were tens of thousands of horses galloping, the sound of hooves from a single horse could not be heard from so far away. But this knight had used a kind of magic, fearing that no one would know of his arrival. Everyone, including Cynic, had a strange expression on their faces. They were not nervous, but more curious. A small dot appeared on a hill in the distance. But with the eyesight of the experts, they could clearly see that it was a warrior on horseback. This person was riding a pure white horse, with a golden shield in his left hand and a golden spear in his right. He wore a bright silver armor and a fiery red cloak fluttered in the wind. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth, and the sunlight shone on his handsome face and mighty figure, making him look so energetic. Bows were nocked, swords were unsheathed, and the priests took out their staffs, ready to face the enemy. Cynic smiled and waved his hand to indicate that there was no need to be so nervous. He shouted to the newcomer, "Which hero has come to my hunting ground? If you are here to congratulate me on my wedding with Princess Sicila, I will pardon your trespass. Throw away your weapons and dismount, and you can join my hunting feast." Princess Sicila's heart was in her throat when she saw a godlike knight appear in the distance. But when the man came close enough for her to see clearly, she realized that it was Metatro. She couldn't help but feel surprised and disappointed at the same time. Medanzo replied in a loud voice, "My name is Medanzo, and I come from Shirling." "Cynic, I'm not here to drink, I'm here to kill you." While answering, Medanzo had already galloped forward on his horse. He bent his upper body slightly forward, raised his shield in his left hand, and pointed the golden spear in his right. He was only one man and one horse, but he was in a charging stance. The sound of hooves echoed across the grassland, as if thousands of horses were galloping. Madanzo was still quite a distance away. He dashed down a hillside and then disappeared. His line of sight was blocked by a small hill. When he galloped up the hill again, his shield was already shining with golden light, making him look like a majestic god. He was really bold, so bold that there was no limit to his boldness. He actually dared to charge at so many experts. Cynic was on his way back to the camp. Some of the guards had already returned to the camp in advance to prepare for the ceremony and the feast. There were about 200 guards with him. Except for Crips, the commander of the guards, the other 4 supreme warriors were also present. Madanzo's action was both surprising and amusing, but no one dared to be negligent. 2 supreme warriors led dozens of riders to meet him, followed by the supreme mage Diego Joao, who was holding his staff high. They were the head of the legion, the commander of the vanguard, and the chief priest. They were already very familiar with each other. At this moment, it was a good opportunity to show off in front of His Majesty. Madanzo seemed to be in a charging stance, but when he was about to reach the battle range, he suddenly changed. He threw the golden shield in his hand out like a battle axe, and at the same time, leaped high from the back of his horse and swung down with all his might in midair. The shield was blocked by 2 rays of sword light in front of the cavalry formation, exploding into a ball of golden light and shattering into pieces. The supreme mage Diego Joao also sacrificed a ray of light to cover the charging warriors. Dozens of spears whistled into the air. A golden ray of light fell from the sky, as if separating light and darkness. A powerful momentum swept away the flying spears and hit the light of the guard formation. The light was shattered, and the 2 supreme warriors roared and leaped high. 2 arcs of sword light crossed to block the golden light, but at this moment, they heard the neighing of horses. The attack from the sky was blocked, and the warriors could still bear the aftermath of the energy, but the horses under them could not bear it and fell to the ground. Shinnok shouted, "This man is the general of Leng. Be careful of the weapon in his hand, kill him." After saying that, he pulled out his sword and urged his horse to rush over. As soon as His Majesty moved, the whole formation moved. The guards were divided into 2 wings, and under the leadership of the 2 supreme warriors, they also moved to outflank the king. The court supreme mage White flew above the king in midair and threw 2 scrolls from afar. Wild wind blades erupted, and the sky was filled with blurry light. Madanzo waved his golden spear and drew a circle in the air. An invisible energy shield appeared in the air, blocking the opponent's attack. He somersaulted in the air and landed on the ground. At this time, a large group of people had rushed over and formed a battle formation. Chapter 247. Notice of welcoming the New Year's storytelling event. Ever since Duppy was released, I've been plagued by all sorts of miscellaneous matters. Sometimes I can't help but sigh. Why are there only 24 hours in a day? These past few years, I've often been busy. Perhaps I've developed a kind of tenacity to persevere in a stable state. I suddenly remembered that it's been a long time since I've story told, and it's almost the end of the year. December 31st, Saturday, 7 p.m. sharp, welcoming the New Year's storytelling event, will be held on the Gentleman's Residence YY channel. Another year has passed. Everyone can gather on the internet to be lively. I'll be storytelling. Enthusiastic readers can sing, tell jokes, and perform all sorts of other talents. Interested readers can inquire about the specific method of participation in the book club. See the pinned announcement in the book review section for how to join the book club. In addition, the annual selection has already begun. There's an announcement on the homepage. There's also a voting option right below the title of the book on the homepage. Ordinary users will each have 1 free ticket. 6 users will each have 2 free tickets. I'm asking for everyone's votes here. Due to the limited number of votes, please focus your votes on the book of the year, Duppy. As for the author of the year, I don't need to vote. I'm only asking for everyone's free tickets. There's no need, and it's not worth it for you to spend your money on paid tickets. If you really have that kind intention, you might as well give me a tip. I'm already very grateful for the support of the official subscription. Asking for tickets isn't for any title, but a form of acknowledgement. It's almost the end of the year. Based on the principle of free tickets, let's all be lively for once finally. A grand and formal request. This month's and this year's final closing monthly tickets. Chapter 248. In the distance, Princess Sisela couldn't help but cry out in alarm. She looked very anxious. She was very worried about Metatro's safety, and at the same time, she secretly blamed this brave warrior for being so reckless. He simply wanted to be in the limelight without caring about his life. Medanzo didn't show the slightest trace of fear. Amidst the battle cries of the crowd, an ethereal song was suddenly heard. It was sung in a language that no one could understand, but it was indescribably beautiful. Dozens of galloping horses suddenly knelt on the ground, and the knights were caught off their horses. White, who was flying in the air, shouted, "This is a sonic phantom attack. There are assassins in the north." The mages chanted in unison. Prayers dispelled the influence of the song, and many warriors came back to their senses. Just now, some of them had dropped their weapons when they heard the song. The battle formation of the palace guards was a little chaotic. Only the masters remained clear-headed. Medanzo had already landed in the distance. He stood there with his golden spear in hand. Suddenly, a strange scene appeared in the forest in the north. It was clearly a mountain, but it seemed to have turned into a sea. A blue wave was pouring down, and there were 3 people standing on the top of the wave. No, it should be 2 people and an upright monster. The monster had the head of a fish and the body of a human. It swung its tail rapidly to stimulate the wave. Behind it stood 2 supreme mages with staffs in their hands. They were Goliath and his student Walter. As for the monster, it was naturally Sylvia's summoned beast Rulio. The 3 of them had actually come, and they had even formed a small battle formation. Seeing the wave rushing towards them from afar, many warriors tried to hide in fear. At this moment, they heard a buzzing sound from the staffs, and the phantoms in their souls were broken. It turned out that everything was just an illusion. But the 3 of them had already appeared on a steep slope in the north. They were very fast, and they had come from the deep forest. As soon as Sinaka's hunt ended, the guards in the mountains naturally retreated. But the 3 of them immediately rushed out. As soon as the illusion of the waves broke, Goliath and Walter raised their staffs at the same time. Countless spiraling wind blades shot out, diverting the rain of arrows. Rulio, on the other hand, brandished a serrated long sword, and a transparent blade aura surged towards the Assyrian imperial guards like a flying wave. The 2 supreme warriors swung their swords at the same time, and the arc of light cut through the transparent sawtooth blade. The imperial guards pulled out their swords. Their blades were engraved with flowery script. Amidst the chanting of the heavenly officials, they formed a formation of swords that looked like a well. It was as if they were an impenetrable fortress. The dazzling appearance of Medanzo and the sneak attack of Goliath and the other 2 completely attracted everyone's attention. At this time Ife shouted, "Watch out to the south." At this time, an assassin appeared silently from a 3rd direction. Just as Rulio swung his serrated sword, a lonely figure suddenly appeared from the south of the hunting ground. He was wearing a coarse linen robe and had worn boots. He held a warrior's longbow in his hand and carried a quiver of arrows on his back. He knocked an arrow and shot it from a distance. The arrow was silent, as if it could pierce through space. It whistled when it got close. The guards behind Sinak were caught off guard, and the shockwave caused by the arrow sent them tumbling. Then there was a loud bang, and a white light rushed out of the void, shattering the arrow. The magic formation formed by the heavenly officials had neutralized the arrow's attack. Then the white light burst out in succession, making rhythmic banging sounds. Gilgamesh did not just shoot one arrow, but steadily moved forward and shot a series of arrows. He strode on the grassland, not too fast or too slow, leaving a line or 2 of deep footprints behind him. Medanzo was the first to charge, followed by Goliath and Gilgamesh, one in the open and one in the dark, from the north and south. When Gilgamesh shot a series of arrows, Medanzo waved his golden spear and rushed into the battle formation again, while Rulio did not stop once he swung his sword. The fierce battle had already begun. Powerful assassins appeared from 3 directions at the same time, but the guards did not panic under the restraint of Sinek. 200 Imperial Guards, 4 Supreme Warriors, 3 Supreme Mages, and a group of court mages seemed to form an impregnable battle fortress in the wilderness. They did not disperse to launch a counterattack, but advanced in the direction of Medanzo. 2 Supreme Mages prayed for the warriors in the battle formation, and the weapons used by the Imperial Guards were all blessed with magic. The light connected together, like a moving, murderous wall. And the great formation of mages commanded by Faust firmly guarded the battlefield, making up for every flaw in the defense, and could also launch a counterattack. The most magnificent battle scene appeared on Medanzo's side on the west side. The attack of the Key of Destiny in his hand was beyond people's understanding and could not be diverted at all. It was like the test of fate, and in a head-on battle, it could only be resisted head-on. The golden light was like a dazzling bolt of lightning that slashed down from all directions, but he was fighting and retreating. Because the opponent's battle formation was moving rapidly in his direction, Medanzo could never resist it alone. At most, he could only restrain the attack while retreating. If there were no other people on either side to help, Medanzo would have been trapped by the enemy at this moment and would not have been able to escape even if he had wings. The fiercest battle took place on the north side. Rulio's blade was almost transparent, and with a wave of power, it was far less magnificent than the golden light of Medanzo's spear. But behind him was Goliath and Walter, who were operating magic to protect him from the counterattack while increasing the power of his attacks. The Imperial Guard's battle formation on this side burst out a series of flashes from time to time, creating a state of intense anxiety. The calmest battle took place on Gilgamesh's side in the south. He simply walked over from afar, continuously shooting arrows. Every time he got closer, the power of his arrows would increase by a fraction as he silently shot them out. Only when they reached the front of the battle formation did they let out a whistling sound, and were constantly smashed by the magic protection and the light of various swords, leaving only bursts of energy shock waves. Princess Sisela finally saw Gilgamesh. His appearance was so simple, and he kept shooting plain arrow after plain arrow at the enemy. Sisela felt an inexplicable warmth in her heart. She could no longer hear the sounds of the fierce battle, and could only stare blankly at Gilgamesh approaching from afar. She opened her mouth to shout something, but her throat seemed to be blocked. In the ambush of 3 fronts, Medanzo's side was clearly at a disadvantage, while Rulio's side was evenly matched. Only Gilgamesh was advancing step by step. But the guards on Sineka's side had yet to display their greatest fighting strength. Faust had commanded the court guards to deploy a magic formation, only to stabilize the situation and protect his majesty. Sinek himself had drawn his sword, the blade faintly emitting a blood-red light, but he had yet to make a move. Flying Bull Shani leaned against the carriage, staring at the approaching Gilgamesh, his pupils gradually contracting. In the distant camp, Krips had already led 300 Imperial Guards towards them on horseback. Sinek used a magic signal to order them to outflank Goliath and Walter. It seemed that the stalemate would soon be reversed. If these assassins did not hurry up and flee, they would not be able to escape. To succeed in an assassination, the most important thing was to succeed in a sneak attack. If one failed, they would have to flee 1,000 miles away. Facing a battle formation head-on like this was already a failure for the assassins. Sinek gripped his sword and sneered. He was thinking about which assassin to behead first. Ely did not care about the outcome of the battle, nor did she care whether the assassins would succeed in assassinating Sinek. She only watched Gilgamesh's movements. There were only 12 arrows in Gilgamesh's quiver. Based on his shooting speed and distance, he would run out of arrows in less than a third of the way. When the last arrow in Gilgamesh's hand left the bowstring, Iguan also shot up from the carriage like an arrow leaving the bowstring. He let out a deafening roar in midair and brandished a strange weapon in his hand. It looked like a long prism, but it was twisted into a spiral arc. It also looked like a curved blade with 2 sharp strings on both sides. Its shape was very similar to a strange bull's horn that had been polished and elongated. When this weapon was brandished, it gave off a soul-shaking sound. A spiral storm surged out of the air and swept towards Gilgamesh's figure. Gilgamesh had once shot down her twin sister, the heavenly bull goddess Juxian, with one arrow. Ili was waiting for him. Not only did this attack carry great power, but it also contained an angry imprisonment. She wanted to wrap Gilgamesh in the center of the storm and prevent him from escaping. Gilgamesh threw away the longbow after shooting the last arrow. If one was close enough, they could see that he was wearing a pair of boxing gloves. They were carefully made from the toughest snakeskin of Humbaba. Enkidu also had a pair of the same boxing gloves. His boxing gloves shone with a faint golden light, but the aura of power was different from that of a pure warrior like Enkidu. With a low hum, it contained a strange magic. It was as if there was an invisible armor spreading along the boxing gloves and covering his whole body. If he swung his fist, not only would there be a powerful impact, but there would also be an instantaneous high-level magic. He was ready to swing his fist to meet the storm falling from the sky. However, at this moment, there was another unexpected change. Gilgamesh had only swung his fist halfway when he suddenly turned his wrist and grabbed a longbow. It was the famous divine bow that he had forged with his own hands. This bow had been given by Gilgamesh to Amon, and Amon had given it to Madanzo for safekeeping. At this moment, it was back in his hands. Gilgamesh turned his wrist and held the bow in his hand, just in the posture of shooting an arrow. Then he pulled the bowstring and pulled out an arrow from the bowstring out of thin air. This was not an arrow condensed from energy. This time, he had come to assassinate Emperor Cynic. Under his linen sleeves, there was a bracelet. It was this supreme mage's spatial artifact. This arrow was drawn from the bracelet. It was about 3 feet long, and the white shaft was filled with a terrifying aura. There were strange veins on the body of the arrow that seemed to be flowing. Without the feather, it was just a bare shaft. There was also no arrowhead. The tip of the shaft was naturally pointed, making it look extremely sharp. This was Humbaba's tusk. It should have been curved, but Gilgamesh had refined it into such an arrow. The spine of Gilgamesh's divine bow was refined from Humbaba's gugu, and the bowstring was made from Humbaba's snake tendon. As soon as the arrow was placed on the bowstring immediately made a strange vibration. It sounded like an angry roar, but also like a wail of pain. The sound of thousands of wild bulls roaring could be heard in the wilderness. In an instant, this plain-looking warrior seemed to have become an indomitable god. Even the grassland around him became blurred under the powerful aura. The gauntlet glowed with golden light as he slowly pulled the bowstring. In mid-air, there seemed to be a phantom of a 9-headed serpent. Faust's expression immediately changed. This was because Gilgamesh was not aiming at the flying bull god in the sky, but at him, who was floating in mid-air in the distance and presiding over the magic formation. This series of unforeseen events happened at the same time. Gilgamesh drew his bow and knocked an arrow. The flying bull god rushed into the sky and fired a thunderstorm at Gilgamesh. However, Gilgamesh did not even raise his head. He did not pay any attention to the thunderstorm at all. This was because he heard a voice in his soul that he absolutely trusted. Gil, let me handle the matters in the sky. You deal with the magic formation with all your strength. This was the voice of God Amon, and the real sneak attack had only just begun. A long sword carrying the power of sealing slashed through the void, and the spiral-shaped storm was abruptly cut in midair before it could fully unfold. Following this slash, Ammonius also stepped out of the void with the eye of sealing in his hand. Since the divine emissary sent by Enlil had made his move, he, the god, had finally appeared in person. Ammon cut the storm with one slash. He then swung his sword with a devouring power towards the flying bull god opposite him. The flying bull god waved his spiraling long sword, and a fierce storm rolled up in midair. He forcefully received Ammon's slash, and his figure flew backwards. At the same time, 2 figures suddenly rushed out from Seneca's guards into the sky. Accompanied by thick smoke and flames, they attacked Ammon from the left and right. In an instant, they formed a triangle in the sky. They were the 2 great generals under Enlil, the god of flames, Kibir, and the god of ashes, Nugus. Enril had long anticipated that Amon might come to assassinate Cynic, and had already set up an ambush in advance. However, Enril did not expect that Amon would make such a big move. Moreover, Faust and Princess Sicila were the real threats to the emperor. Fierce battles broke out in all directions at the same time, from the sky to the ground. The experts of the mortal world had no time to care about the battle between the gods. Gilgamesh's arrow had already been shot. This was the most powerful arrow he had ever shot in his life. No matter how sturdy an ordinary bow or arrow was, it would not be able to withstand such abundant magic power. The sharp whistling sound of the arrow instantly drowned out all the sounds of fighting on the battlefield. If Faust did not respond with all his strength, he would definitely be shot dead on the spot. The mages who had set up the formation were all shocked. At the same time, they mobilized their most powerful magic power. A brilliant light spread out, and a rainbow appeared in the sky. The whistling arrow shot into the rainbow, shattering the colorful halo layer by layer. Finally, it strangely froze in the air. The strong impact of the arrow did not dissipate, as if it was frozen in the viscous air. Outside the formation, the court supreme mage White shouted anxiously, "Master, the scroll!" Then, a look of panic appeared on his face. The magic formation that had been enveloping the entire battlefield suddenly retracted its power, no longer protecting the warriors and King Cynic. Before Gilgamesh shot the arrow, Cynica's guards had been steadily gaining the upper hand. Although the assassins were attacking from 3 directions, the guards' formation was very tight, and they were only advancing rapidly towards Medanzo in the west. Faust led the team of palace clerics to lay down a divine spell formation that covered the entire battlefield. The weapons of the Imperial Guards were engraved with the inscriptions of the divine spell formation. Under the activation of the divine spell formation, the weapons were linked together like an impenetrable fortress. Their first duty was to protect His Majesty's Ankin, so they did not disperse and attack separately. In the distant camp, Cripps had already led 300 Imperial Guards to the rear of Goliath and the other 2, and would soon defeat the assassins. Goliath, Walter, and Rulio's retreat had been cut off, and Medanzo, who was in a bitter battle, could not escape either. Although Cynic was cruel, his command of the battle was not chaotic at all. Ely's attack was the first surprise. The Imperial Guards did not know the origin of this female giant, and did not expect her to be so powerful. Could it be that a god was hiding beside Emperor Cynic? The thunderous roar of joyful thunder as it soared into the sky and the thunderstorm that spread out was so terrifying that the warriors facing Gilgamesh felt their minds being seized by it. Ammonius' appearance was the second surprise. He stepped out of the void, waved his sword, and cut off the thunderstorm, repelling Ely. Then, thick smoke and flames appeared in the sky, and a battle between the gods really began. The Imperial Guards facing the south almost forgot to breathe at this moment, and looked at the sky with an extremely shocked expression. No matter what kind of warrior they were, when they saw the gods fighting in the sky with their own eyes, they would always be in awe. Not everyone could be Enkidu. The third surprise was the long-fong arrow shot by Gilgamesh. Its power was unparalleled, and the whistling sound of it even drowned out the fierce battle of the gods in the sky. Its target was Faust, who was floating in the air. The court supreme mage White, who was floating above Cynic, was shocked. He subconsciously shouted for Faust, reminding the sage to use the scrolls. In fact, White had long wanted to remind Faust to use the scrolls, but he did not say it just now because there was no need. The assassins could not break into the battle formation, and the protection of the magic formation was very tight, so there was naturally no need to waste the defensive scrolls. Gilgamesh was still far away, so there was no need to use the offensive scrolls for the time being. But against Rulio and the others, they could use the high-grade offensive scrolls, which would save them a lot of effort. White used 2 high-grade scrolls to shoot down Medanzo from the air. Perhaps because the Imperial Guards had gained the upper hand, Cripps and his men were about to surround them, so Faust did not have to use the scrolls for now. But when Gilgamesh shot that arrow, White realized that the situation was not good. He did not think that the assassins could succeed, but seeing so many unexpected changes suddenly happen, he was worried that the situation would get out of control, and he reminded Faust to end the battle quickly. Unfortunately, his reminder was too late. It was too late to use the defensive scrolls to deal with Gilgamesh's arrow, and could only use the magic formation to activate the instantaneous magic. White's heart suddenly turned cold when he saw the arrow shattering the halos on the rainbow one after another and finally being frozen in midair. This was because the divine spell formation formed by the team of palace priests and guards under Faust's command had suddenly broken away from the fierce battle. Chapter 249. The power of Gilgamesh's fanged arrow was so astonishing that even the powerful rainbow aura couldn't block it. Faust, in a moment of life and death, instantly activated his strongest defensive ability, the air elemental armor, and forcibly froze the arrow in the air. This kind of magic could solidify the surrounding air, turning the outer layer viscous until the inner layer was as hard as diamond. Moreover, Faust's operation of the magic formation was equivalent to concentrating the most powerful magic power of the 30 priests at the same time. With the instantaneous activation of the magic formation by a 9th-level supreme mage, its defensive ability was simply unstoppable. Although the air elemental armor was magical, there was an obvious limitation when using it. It would freeze the user in place. Before the magic effect disappeared, neither Faust, who was in the air, nor the priests on the ground, could move. Naturally, Faust couldn't freeze all the warriors. He only used the air elemental armor to protect himself and the 30 priests in the formation, because their magic power was circulating together. Warder realized that the situation was not good. He immediately descended from the air and waved his staff frantically. Smoke and dust rose up from the south of the formation, and stones flew everywhere. In an instant, a layer of earth elemental wall formed from sand and mud appeared. He could see clearly that Gilgamesh didn't care about what was happening on the battlefield. He still stepped forward, drew his bow, and knocked another fanged arrow. This arrow could no longer hurt Faust, but Faust would become a target in the air. Warder, who had encountered the sudden change, didn't forget his duty. He instantaneously released magic to protect the formation, but as an 8th-level mage, he couldn't stop Gilgamesh's second fanged arrow at all. The cause and effect of this series of changes were very complicated to explain, but it all happened in the short time that Gilgamesh took 3 steps forward. The guards facing Gilgamesh were still looking up at the sky, dumbfounded. The magic formation connected to the defense of the formations suddenly disappeared. The light emitted by their weapons also disappeared, and a cloud of smoke and dust gushed out in front of them. Gilgamesh's second fanged arrow was shot horizontally towards Sinaka's position. No matter how many obstacles there were in the middle, it flew straight towards the target. With the sound of a huge wave, a hole appeared in the half-solidified earth elemental wall. The huge wave of impact swept 5 or 6 royal guards who could not react in time into the air. The speed of this fanged arrow did not slow down at all, and with a whistling sound, it arrived in front of Sinak. Sinak was indeed a supreme warrior who had killed countless enemies. He let out a strange roar, jumped from his horse, and swung his sword. Sinaka's sword, glowing with a blood-red light, collided with the tip of the arrow. Time seemed to freeze for a moment, and then there was an explosion of blood. Cracks appeared on both the heavy sword and the long arrow, and a powerful shockwave erupted from the point of impact. Sinaka's warhorse was sent flying, and the emperor himself was sent flying backwards. Even Enkidu would have to use his full strength to take this arrow from Gilgamesh. Although Sinak could block it, Sinak was still had. The most unlucky one was the supreme mage Wyatt. He had just cast the earth elemental wall and fell from the air when Sinaka's burly figure was sent flying by the explosion of a huge shock wave. The poor supreme mage could not use any instantaneous magic to harm his majesty, who he was supposed to protect. In a moment of hesitation, he was hit hard by Sinak, breaking his tendons and bones on the spot. He was the first to die. As soon as Sinak landed on the ground after knocking White away, he gripped his saber tightly. The southern and central lines of the formation were in chaos, but Gilgamesh didn't give him any chance to catch his breath. He immediately fired another arrow. This arrow was simply beyond the imagination of the people. Even a god like Ammon had never seen such archery. If Gilgamesh had shot an arrow like this in the Battle of Kenmet, Ammon might not have had the chance to become a god, because it would have been difficult for him to survive. With a twang of the bowstring, the divine art that shocked the world suddenly disappeared, leaving only a strong shock wave in the air. What Gilgamesh shot was not the fanged arrow, but himself. His figure shot out like an arrow, and before anyone could react, he shot himself into the enemy's formation through the gap created by the arrow just now. Just as Sinak stood still, Gilgamesh's arrow arrived. His glove flashed with golden light as he swung his fist. Even though Sinak had been through hundreds of battles, he had never experienced a situation like this. He hurriedly held his sword with both hands and slashed with all his might. Gilgamesh's fist hit the tip of the sword, and the glove, made of Humbaba's toughest snakeskin, cracked. Blood spurted from his white knuckles, and the sound of bones breaking could be heard. This punch also shattered Sinaka's heavy sword, which was flashing with a bloody light. His body flew forward, and his fist landed on Sinaka's chest. With a bang, Sinaka's clothes from his chest to his chest turned into countless flying butterflies, accompanied by a flash of light, which was also mixed with flying fine armor pieces. The emperor was wearing a soft armor that also had the effect of divine magic, but it could not withstand Gilgamesh's attack. With a strange cracking sound, a large part of Sinaka's chest caved in. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backwards. If Faust's grand priestly formation hadn't been frozen, then even if Gilgamesh had transformed himself into a sharp arrow, it would have been very difficult for him to reach Sinak in the center of the formation. But there were no ifs. Gilgamesh did not even spare the Assyrian emperor a glance after sending Sinak flying with a single punch. Instead, he leaped over Faust's head and landed right on the carriage that Princess Sisela was sitting in. Up until now, Princess Sisela had become a forgotten corner of the battlefield. But she had always been safe. Just a moment ago, Joy was guarding the front of the carriage, and she was protected by Faust's divine spell formation. But now, she had suddenly become free. Gilgamesh did not shake the reins or whip the horses, but the two horses neighed at the same time, as if they were stimulated by a powerful force. They galloped away at full speed. There were so many guards in Dasinak. How could they let Gilgamesh and Princess Sisela leave so easily? Everything happened too quickly, and it was hard to react in the middle of a fierce battle. Furthermore, the battle wasn't limited to just one place. Just as Gilgamesh shot the second tusk arrow, the divine formation under Faust's command froze and broke away from the battle. The Imperial Guards who were fighting Rulio and the other two did not even have time to react. The light on their weapons dimmed, and they lost the protection of the divine formation. But Gaulier and the others seemed to have expected this. Rulio swayed in place and turned into a huge strange fish, spreading from the hill where he was to the ground under the guard's feet as if it was instantly liquefied. The earth surged like waves, and the strange fish opened its mouth towards the sky, as if it was singing, but at the same time, it sounded like it was letting out a shrill cry. The scene before the eyes of the soldiers changed, as if they were standing on a wave. The four hooves of the horses and the feet of the warriors sank into the swamp-like ground. This was the innate skill of Rulio the mermaid. It might not have much effect on masters with strong minds and souls, but it was most suitable for large-scale attacks against ordinary warriors. If Faust was still operating the divine formation to cover the battle formation, the warriors would not be affected, but Faust was temporarily frozen in the air. The court's supreme mage White could have cast a blessing magic to free the warriors from the illusion, but he happened to be killed by Sinak. Walter raised his staff to help Rulio, but Goliath flew to a low altitude and pointed his staff forward. The illusion created by Rulio turned into a real scene. The soil under the feet of the Imperial Guards in front of them really seemed to have turned into a liquefied swamp. The soldiers and horses instantly fell down and cried out in alarm. The illusion created by the charm mermaid and Gaulier's quicksand spell had a wonderful effect. Although earth elemental quicksand was very simple, it was cast at such a long distance and in such a large area. It softened the soil under the feet of the army, which showed the depth of Goliath's magic power. The magic used by a supreme mage may not be some brilliant or rare magic, but it was to make simple means have a magical effect that others could not. No one had ever seen Goliath charge directly into battle. Even if this supreme mage appeared on the battlefield, he was still the commander of the entire army. Today's action showed that the old man was also a top master in combat. Goliath did not fly high. He cast quicksand in the air and then picked up his staff on the ground, rolling up a gust of wind with liquefied soil flying, and actually rolled up the weapons that the Imperial Guards had accidentally dropped. The sharp tips shot backward like a rain of arrows in a certain direction. At this time, Gilgamesh's fist hit Seneca's chest. The burly figure of the great emperor flew straight back, and the swept weapons hit his back one after another. There was also a flash of light on his back. The armor actually had a defensive effect, bouncing off many of the swords and spears. Only 3 spears pierced into his body. Then Cynic fell to the ground with a loud bang, exhausted on the soil that had just become soft and then hard in an instant. Half of his body was buried. When Goliath launched this attack, Gilgamesh had already jumped into Princess Sisela's carriage and drove away. Faust, who was in the air, could only watch helplessly. Goliath did not continue fighting. He immediately threw out a flying spear and shot deep into the mountains with Rulio and Walter, ignoring the other situation on the battlefield. Then there was a scream of horror, "Your Majesty!" In another direction, there was still a battle. 2 supreme warriors and a supreme mage led dozens of Imperial Guards to besiege Madanzo. Madanzo waved the key of fate and turned into rays of golden light. He was struggling to hold on, but at this time, a great change suddenly occurred in the rear of the battle formation. The supreme mage Diego Jojo sensed that something was wrong. When he turned around, he saw Cynic lying on the ground. The Imperial Guards on the north and south sides also came to their senses. When they found that Cynic had been assassinated, they cried out in unison. They were instantly thrown into chaos. Madanzo took the opportunity to wave the key of fate. A golden light shot out from the top of his head and went straight behind him. He turned into a golden light and fled. The white horse he rode was still at the foot of the hill in the distance. Madanzo landed on the horse's back and urged it to gallop in the direction of the Lys River. All the assassins suddenly left, and none of them flew into the sky. Gilgamesh drove a carriage, Madanzo rode a horse, and even Goliath, who was controlling the flying spears, flew at a low altitude. The Imperial Guards were in chaos. No one gave any orders. The panicked guards did not know whether to continue to guard Cynic or to chase the assassins in a certain direction. The supreme mage Diego Jojo stumbled to Seneca's side. At this time, a ray of light sprinkled down from the sky and fell on Seneca's body. Faust's voice was heard shouting, "Saving His Majesty is more important." The air elemental armor that froze the great formation of gods was finally undone. Although it was a short time, it seemed so long. When the great formation of wood was restored to its original state, everything was over. The light sprinkled on Seneca's body. His body floated up from the soil very smoothly. His sunken chest miraculously recovered to its original state. The 3 spears stuck in his back also seemed to be pulled out by an invisible hand, but there was no trace of blood. What a miraculous healing magic this was! Faust was operating the magic formation with all his strength. The bewildered Imperial Guards did not even dare to breathe at this moment. Diego Jojo cried out in surprise, "His Majesty is still alive." Cynic was indeed still alive. He spat out a mouthful of blood with his eyes closed, showing signs of life. Faust hurriedly shouted, "No one act rashly. His Majesty's current injury cannot be touched. We must operate the magic formation with all our strength to continuously heal him and stabilize his life." The Imperial Guards did not chase after anyone. Instead, they formed a defensive circle, protecting Cynic and the magic formation in the middle. Faust was chanting incantations. Various rays of light continuously fell on Seneca's body. Only the sage imperial advisor himself could tell how many mysterious methods had been used and how miraculous the healing effects were. From the looks of it, even the dead could be brought back to life, right? Everyone could only pray in their hearts. The supreme warrior Crips finally arrived at the battlefield with 300 Imperial Guards from the camp, but they were already too late. Diego Jojo shouted from afar, "Rein in your mounts. Everyone dismount. Don't shake the ground. Save His Majesty's life." Seneca's signs of life were so brittle and weak that even the shaking of the ground could kill him. How could Seneca still be alive? Gilgamesh was born with divine strength. Using the acceleration from the divine bow, he shot out like an arrow. His fist landed solidly on Seneca's chest, enough to collapse a small hill. Of course, there were two main reasons why he was still breathing. First of all, he was also a supreme warrior, and his sword had dissolved some of Gilgamesh's power. The soft armor he was wearing was probably the most precious magical armor on the continent, and it could disperse and deflect powerful impacts. But most importantly, Gilgamesh's punch did not aim to take Seneca's life. It shattered Seneca's strength and bones, turning the mighty Assyrian emperor into a cripple. Not to mention Faust, even the gods would not be able to heal this injury. He could not make another movement, nor could he say another word. Of course, this was also because Seneca's body was tough enough and his defense was strong enough. If it was someone else, they would have been smashed into a bloody pulp long ago. Gilgamesh was currently driving his carriage through the undulating plains, turning east towards the Lys River. Princess Sisela sat in the carriage, looking at Gilgamesh's back as if she was in a dream. As soon as Gilgamesh appeared, he shot 12 arrows in a row. Then, he shot another 2 arrows that pierced through the enemy's formation. Finally, he himself turned into an arrow and shot towards the center of the enemy's formation. Princess Sisela couldn't react at all. She didn't even see Gilgamesh send Seneca flying with a single punch. Then, she saw the godlike Gil land on the carriage and take her and Exon away. She subconsciously reached out her hand to touch her cheek. She could still feel it, but it didn't feel real. Even the 2 horses driving the carriage felt a little surreal. They couldn't possibly be running so fast. It was like a winged Pegasus. There was an invisible force pushing the carriage forward. It felt like the carriage was floating on water. Even though there were no pursuers, Gilgamesh still used magic to speed the carriage up. According to Amon's plan, they were to leave the battlefield as fast as possible after they succeeded. They were not to fly into the sky. The gods might interfere in this assassination. As for the gods, they would leave it to Amon and Amon to bring up the rear. The Lys River was right in front of them. Suddenly, the 2 horses felt their hooves and the carriage behind them sink. The strange force disappeared. The carriage slowed down abruptly. Princess Sisela, who was sitting in the carriage, was caught off guard and fell into Gilgamesh's arms with a cry. It turned out that Gilgamesh had turned around and stood up, hugging her. The princess's eyes were wet and her face was flushed as if she was drunk. Her cherry lips parted slightly as she murmured in his arms, "Gil." Gilgamesh reached out and gently sent her back to her seat. "Sit tight," he said in a low voice. Then, the hero steadied himself on the shaft of the carriage, raised his left arm towards the sky, and grabbed the divine bow out of thin air. Then, he put his right hand on the bowstring and pulled out a long fanged arrow covered with strange patterns. Princess Sisela sat in the carriage and looked up at Gilgamesh. She seemed to be intoxicated. She looked like a love-struck fool. She didn't know what Gilgamesh was trying to do by pointing the bow at the sky. She didn't even have the heart to think about it. She only had eyes for him. Chapter 250. Smoke, flames, and storms were like a spiraling tsunami, trapping Ammonius in the sky. The god of flame, the god of ash, and the god of flying bull were exerting all their strength to fight Ammon. Ammon waved the eye of sealing, like a reef standing in the stormy waves, smashing the attacks of the 3 divine emissaries again and again. Not all 9th-level divine emissaries were good at this kind of battle. For example, Palanthos, whom Ammon was familiar with, may be the closest to the realm of immortality among all the divine emissaries of the Anunnaki divine clan, but she could never cope with this kind of situation. Among the generals under Enlil, the god of ash, the god of flame, the god of wind, the god of sky, the god of flying bull, and the god of dark wolf were the most powerful, especially the god of ash. Even ordinary gods would have a hard time dealing with him. Among them, the god of sky, Zhu Xian, had been shot down by Gilgamesh, and the god of dark wolf was Bright Moon Knight, who had assassinated Ammon. Seeing that the battle on the ground was over, Amon did not want to continue fighting and quickly got away, but he was trapped by the three powerful divine emissaries. Especially the female giant Edam, she was simply crazy, and he had to beat back one of them to open a gap. If he wanted to end the battle quickly, Amon would have to pay the price. His whole body was shrouded in a faint golden light, and he waved the eye of sealing in the thick smoke and raging fire, turning it into a power that seemed to be able to annihilate everything and slash towards the god of flying bull. Amon concentrated all his strength on one person, and the eye of sealing passed through the swirling thunderstorm, as if everything was still, and hit the spiral-shaped sword held by the god of flying bull. There was a sudden clap of thunder in the air, and Edam's burly figure was shaken back. Amon did not relax his steps and slashed again with brute force. Ijin could not block it, but the attacks of the god of flame and the god of ash were not idle. With a bang, flames suddenly ignited outside the golden light shrouding Zaman's body, and he looked like a burning human-shaped fireball. Because of the continuous attacks of the god of flame, Amon was finally ignited when Ishuang had no time to defend. At this moment, Amon had to withdraw his magic to extinguish the flames to avoid being hurt, but the eye of sealing still slashed towards Ishuang. With a loud crack, the eye of sealing cut off the tip of the spiral-shaped sword, and the surging power dispersed Ishuang's protective magic. The female giant somersaulted in retreat and was abruptly cut down. Just as she was about to stabilize her body and switch positions with the ash god in an attempt to avoid the continuous attacks, a long fang arrow flew diagonally towards her with a roar. That roar was so sharp that it seemed to have awakened the piercing pain in his soul. Then he felt nothing at all. Of sword of Zaman. Of dragon. Under normal circumstances, he might not be a match for Amon, but under the continuous attacks of Amon, she had already lost control of her body. Amon did not even care about the attacks of the god of ash, and swung his sword at her for the third time. No one knew if she could block the third sword, because Gilgamesh had already taken the opportunity to shoot her down. At the same time that Gilgamesh shot Eli, the raging flames that enveloped Amon suddenly extinguished and turned into thick smoke. This was not extinguished by Amon himself. He did not block the attack of the god of flame and was immediately hit by the god of ash. The god of ash was the most powerful god's messenger under Enlil, especially when he worked together with the god of flame. They had a technique called terrifying ashes. Amon could still use his magic to extinguish the burning flames. But when the god of ash extinguished the flames, it meant that all the energy of the attack was exhausted in an instant. It was a very strong injury that could cause a kind of permanent injury that was hard to recover from. Even a god would need to heal for a long time. What was even more frightening was that one would lose the strength to continue fighting. However, Amon seemed to have already prepared for this. Even without Gilgamesh's help, he would rather get injured in order to quickly escape. After Gilgamesh shot Eli, the flames on Amon's body extinguished and turned into thick smoke. He then swung the eye of sealing backhandedly, but it was not towards the enemy, but towards himself. The scene was shocking. Amon had cut himself in the middle like cutting vegetables. This was a technique that only a god could use, because mortals could not really cut themselves in half. Moreover, Amon had also borrowed the mystical eye of sealing in his hand. Two Amon appeared in the sky, one in front and one behind. The Amon in the front was unharmed, but the golden light on his body had dimmed a little. He turned into a golden meteor and shot towards the lazy river. The Amon in the back had no golden light on his body, nor did he have a sword in his hand. His whole body was wrapped in thick smoke, and he turned into ashes in the thick smoke. Although Amon's method was incomparably magical, it also had the feeling of a venomous snake biting its hand and a brave man cutting off his wrist. He was not injured, but he lost his magic power. He cut off the injury that had already been caused by the terrifying ashes, and at the same time he escaped. Gilgamesh shot the last fanged arrow, and the divine bow in his hand fell to the ground. His body went limp, and he half knelt on the carriage, supporting himself with one hand as if he was very weak. Princess Sisela fell from her seat again and held Gilgamesh in her arms. She asked anxiously, Gil, what's wrong? Gil stretched out his hand to support the princess's soft shoulders and looked up at her with a smile. He panted and said, I'm fine, just tired. Gilgamesh was tired. Today, as soon as he appeared, he shot out 12 consecutive arrows, and then shot out 2 earth-shattering tusk arrows. Finally, he turned himself into an arrow and shot into the enemy's formation, punching Sinak and sending him flying. When he shot the last arrow that killed Ife, he was already exhausted. Even though he was born with great strength and was a supreme mage of the 9th level, he could only sit on the carriage with the princess's help. The princess opened her arms and wrapped them around his waist. Although the carriage had slowed down, it was still running at a normal speed. The Lizi River was already in front of them. The horses that were pulling the carriage wanted to stop, but Gilgamesh gathered the last of his strength and snapped his fingers. 2 gusts of wind hit the horses' buttocks, and the 2 horses neighed and stepped into the water. However, they were lifted up by a strange force and floated on the surface of the water. This was not Gilgamesh's doing. The back of a huge ironback was vaguely visible under the water. It swam right under the carriage and crossed the river with the carriage. Elmar, the king of the ironbacks, was responsible for hiding in the Lizi River. Medanzo had already crossed the river on horseback, so there was no need for her help. Princess Sisela had no idea that the carriage was being carried by an ironback. Leaning on Gilgamesh's chest, she gazed at the village, the blue sky and the white clouds on the other side of the river. Somehow, she wished that the river could be wider so that the carriage could carry her and her lover on the gentle waves. This was the carriage of Emperor Sinek. It was in this carriage that Princess Sisela entered the city of Lizi to be worshipped by the people. When she returned to the other side of the Lizi River, there was no one else in the world except for Gilgamesh, who had just been rescued from the devil's claws. When the carriage arrived at the center of the river, Gilgamesh sat up straight and carried Sissi on his lap. He reached out his hand and caressed the back of Sissi's hand, then gently removed the poisonous shell and threw it into the river. He said gently, I shouldn't have given it to you. Princess Sisela nestled in his arms. She pouted and her eyes were slightly red, but her face was full of happiness. She raised her hands in front of Gilgamesh's eyes and said, And these, take them off too. I don't want them anymore. Gilgamesh had only removed one of the poisonous shells. The other nails of the princess were still decorated with shells, but now she wanted him to remove them all. Gilgamesh looked at her and reached out to remove all the beautiful shells. He flattened them and threw them into the river. Then the carriage finally set foot on the other side of the Lizi River. As the carriage crossed the river, Amon also turned into a golden light and flew over the Lizi River. The god of flame and the god of ash were stunned when they saw that the god of winged bull had been shot down and Amon had escaped by damaging his own magic power. They then turned into flames and smoke and chased after Amon. Their bodies seemed to have collided with an invisible barrier above the Lis River and abruptly came to a halt. A majestic voice sounded in their souls, Kibir, Nugus, this is Marduk's divine realm. You shall not trespass. The god of flame shouted, Is Marduk protecting the assassin? The voice replied coldly, Marduk does not protect Amon, he only allows him to enter the divine realm, but he does not allow you and Enrol's divine emissaries to cross the Lizi River. Amon did not assassinate Sinek. He only stepped forward to block the attack of the god of flying bull. But you two had already laid in ambush and took the initiative to attack. This is a battle between gods. Seneca's death is only a battle between humans. How many people has he killed on the battlefield? If you say that you are protecting the murderer, are you going to blame Enrol? The one who spoke on the other side of the river should be one of Marduk's divine emissaries. Because of the war on the human world, although Marduk had been forced to retreat by Enrol, the west side of the Lizi River was still Marduk's divine realm. Marduk did not allow them to enter, so the two divine emissaries could only look at the river and sigh. Amon was long gone. The carriage carrying Gilgamesh and Princess Sisela had also gone far away. He saw Metatro riding his white horse leisurely from upstream to the opposite bank of the river. The red cloak on his body was torn to shreds, but he still made a disdainful gesture to the god of flame across the river. Then, the horse slowly rode away. Cynic was clearly still breathing, but the conversation of the divine emissaries made it seem like he had been assassinated. Perhaps in the eyes of the gods, it made no difference whether the great emperor was alive or dead at this moment. On the other side of the hunting ground, Faust was still operating the magic formation and casting various healing magic on Cynic. The guards were guarding him carefully and nervously in a circle. From a combat point of view, their losses were actually not that great. In total, they lost dozens of horses, and nearly 100 soldiers suffered varying degrees of injuries. If not counting Ely, the only one who died in the battle was the court's supreme mage, White. But at this moment, it was meaningless to count the casualties, because the great Emperor Seneca's life was in danger, and the assassins had all retreated. In the history of the continent, there was no more perfect and amazing assassination than this. The sun had already set, and the sky was gradually darkening. Bonfires were lit all around. The light of the magic formation illuminated the empty space within the circle of guards, but the great Emperor Cynic was still lying in the center of the dazzling light. The magic formation was still operating. Many of the priests were sweating profusely. Their magic power was about to run out. Saving the great Emperor Seneca's life seemed to be even more difficult than fighting the assassins just now. But before Faust gave the order to stop, no one dared to stop. Even the guards in the surroundings did not dare to move. Currently, the imperial preceptor, Faust, was the highest-ranking official of the empire on the scene. All operations could only be commanded by him. Many people were secretly praying in their hearts, hoping that the imperial preceptor could save Seneca's life, even if it was only for a short period of time. Otherwise, if the great emperor was assassinated, according to the cruel laws of Cynic himself, the guards accompanying him would be severely punished. Faust was not only saving Cynic, he was also saving everyone present. After nightfall, some of the priests were already trembling, with traces of blood seeping from the corners of their mouths. It was spring, but there was a strong chill in the mountains under the curtain of night. The imperial guards who were guarding the surroundings inexplicably felt an irresistible fear in their hearts. They had never been so afraid, even when they were fighting and fighting. At this moment, there was a flash of fire and the sound of galloping horses coming from the southeast. From afar, someone shouted, "Her Majesty the Empress has arrived." It was an army carrying torches. They had rushed over from the city of Lys. Empress? Cynic had come to the hunting ground today to confer the title of Empress. The ceremony could no longer be held, and the hunting feast would never start. Princess Sicilla was also taken away by the assassins, leaving only Cynic, who could die at any time. Now that the Empress had arrived, it could only be Samir who had stayed in the city of Lys. Faust, who was in midair, finally stopped the operation of the formation when he saw that Samir had arrived. He spoke in a tired voice. "His Majesty's injuries are finally under control. His life has been saved. We can move him into the carriage and escort him back to the palace." In the mountains on the west bank of the Lys River, Prince Benut and his guards had set up a tent. From the looks of it, they were also hunting. The situation in the kingdom of Babylon was so tense that Princess Sicilla had to marry Cynic. Moreover, it was said that King Hammurabi II was seriously ill. How could this prince still have the mood to go hunting? A group of people were sitting in the tent, holding a small hunting feast. The food on the table was the game hunted by the guards in the nearby mountains. However, the people sitting in the tent were the heroes, who had just participated in the assassination of Cynic. Princess Sicilla, who was supposed to marry Cynic and become the Empress of Assyria, was among them. A luxurious carriage was parked outside the tent. It was the carriage of Emperor Cynic. Beside it was a handsome white horse. Other than Prince Benut and General Robin, there were 8 other people sitting in the tent. They were Ammon, Gilgamesh, Princess Sicilla, Goliath, Medanzo, Walter, Rulio, and Elmarch. Prince Benut was toasting Goliath. "Lord Goliath, you once defeated the Babylon army on the battlefield. But at that time, we lost wholeheartedly. But this time, we never thought that someone of your noble status would personally take the risk to assassinate Cynic. On behalf of the kingdom of Babylon, I would like to express my gratitude and respect to you." Gallia chuckled. The more distinguished one's status is, the less one can do things? Then the higher one's status is, the more useless one is? An old man like me can't be worshipped every day. I should come out and exercise. Moreover, even a god is involved. How can I just stand by and watch? The assassination of Sinek is not only for the sake of the Hittite kingdom and the kingdom of Babylon, but more importantly, if this person is still alive, it will be a disaster. Binat and Robin hurriedly got up and bowed to Ammon. Thank you, God. We will pray to Marduk and ask him to build a shrine for you in the kingdom of Babylon to thank you for your kindness. With Ammon sitting there, the atmosphere of the hunting feast became a little awkward. Binat and Robin looked a little nervous and uncomfortable because they were sitting together with a god, and this god was not one that the kingdom of Babylon believed in. Every time the two spoke to Ammon, they had to stand up and bow before speaking. They did not dare to remain seated. Ammon waved his hand and said, "Just think of me as Ammon. I'm not sitting here as a god. As for building a shrine for me, there is no need to mention it. I am not a god of the Anunnaki, and the people of the kingdom of Babylon have not accepted the guidance of my faith. But if you know how to be grateful, I will also be very happy." Gilgamesh interrupted, "The Ammon of the empire of Igut? Supreme General Ammon of the empire of Igut? The generals of the armies of all the kingdoms in that chaotic battle were all here." Goliath sighed. "The changes in this world are really unpredictable. Even the gods cannot know everything." Prince Binat asked again, "Gil, is Sinek really dead? If he is dead, how should we deal with it?" Gilgamesh took a sip of wine and replied unhurriedly, "I don't know if Sinek is dead or not, but if he is alive, he might as well be dead. As for how you deal with it, it is your own business. I am no longer interested." Goliath reminded, "Since Commander Robin is also here, I suggest that the Babylon army be transferred to the front line of the Lys River. After the assassination of Sinek, the Assyrian Empire will inevitably be under the control of Samir, and the Queen will also put a lot of troops on the border. Only when the kingdom of Babylon shows the courage and strength to fight will the situation be really reversed." Chapter 251. Goliath gently stroked his beard and said, "No matter who inherits the throne, we must first maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire and control the situation. The assassination of the emperor is a major event. If we don't deal with it well, it is likely to lead to a mutiny. In order to prevent internal strife, we must show our strength to the outside world and guard against sneak attacks. It is necessary to deploy a large number of troops to suppress the Assyrian Empire. As for whether the war will start or not, it depends on the attitude of the kingdom of Babylon." Prince Binut nodded and said, "Once the news of Seneka's assassination spreads, the people of Babylon will be greatly encouraged. The Assyrian Empire's military expansion has reached its limit. The large areas of territory behind the front line need to be consolidated. In fact, it is impossible to launch a large-scale campaign at this time. This is something that the leaders of the various kingdoms can see. But the feelings of the common people and the soldiers are different. Seneka's cruelty is terrifying. When it is said that he will lead his army to attack, the people of the city will flee before the battle even starts. The city's garrison will also collapse at the first touch. Now that the situation has changed, it is time to rally the people's confidence and stabilize the line of defense at the Lys River. I will send messengers in the name of the king to express my condolences to the Assyrian Empire and Queen Samir. For the time being, we will not provoke them and use this as an excuse to start a war." Goliath nodded and said, "That's good. Since you have made such arrangements, our goal of assassinating Sinek has been achieved. I left Saya in the name of visiting the city of Salem, but I went all the way to Lys and brought High Priest Saya and my student Walter here. We have been away for a long time. We should go back now." The Supreme Mage was very straightforward. After saying this, he got up and left. The crowd walked out of the curtains together to see him off. Before leaving, Goliath looked back at Binut and Princess Sisela with a meaningful look. At last he said, "I heard that Hammurabi too is very ill. No matter who inherits the throne of Babylon, take care of yourself. The turmoil on the continent will not end here." Everyone stood in the open space and watched Goliath and Walter leave on the flyer, but Rulio didn't go with them and still stood behind Amon. Princess Sisela suddenly asked, Binut, you said that you don't want to provoke the Assyrian Empire right now, but the assassin is Gil. Everyone knows that he is the hero of the kingdom of Babylon. The Assyrian Empire can't just let the assassin go. What do you plan to do? Prince Binut gritted his teeth and said, That's not easy. Let's just say that we can't find Gil. No one knows his whereabouts. In terms of diplomacy, we can just give them face and step down. Would anyone really dare to go deep into the kingdom of Babylon to find Gil? With a hero like Gil, the morale of the army and the people will be greatly boosted. The kingdom of Babylon is not really afraid of war. Gilgamesh waved his hand and said, If the Assyrian Empire really wants to track down the murderer, just tell them that the kingdom of Babylon will assist in the investigation. Let them send someone to look for me. Whether they can find the murderer or not will depend on luck. Ever since I left Uruk, I have nothing to do with the affairs of the other kingdoms on the continent. Killing Cynic was just a favor to Ammonius. Goliath is gone and so am I. Princess Sisela pouted, Gil, are you going to leave me alone again? Gilgamesh turned to her and said, It's up to your highness to decide whether I'm going alone or not. Prince Binut hurriedly interrupted, My aunt, the king is seriously ill. The kingdom is still waiting for you to return and take charge. When the current storm is over, you and Gil can show yourselves in public and become the heroes of the kingdom. When that time comes, Princess Sisela interrupted him, My nephew, after what you've gone through, I have nothing to do with the court anymore. I hope you can become a successful king in the future. After saying that, he walked to Gilgamesh's side and said, Gil, take me with you. Gilgamesh made an inviting gesture, My princess, please get in the carriage. Princess Sisela said again, Gil, please wait. She went back to the curtain and filled a cup with wine. She held the cup with both hands and walked to Medanzo. She bowed and handed the cup to him. My hero, I don't know how to express my gratitude to you. Please let Sisela give you a cup of wine before you leave. Medanzo's expression was indescribable. He took the cup and drank it in one gulp. Then he waved his hand and said, Your Highness, I wish you and Gil a safe journey. Gilgamesh drove the carriage away with Princess Sisela. They soon disappeared into the distant mountains. Since then, they had become a legend on the continent. No one knew where Gil and Sisela went, but different stories were told in different places. As they were leaving, Medanzo looked at the disappearing carriage and the lonely white horse in the clearing. He seemed to be talking to himself, No matter what I do, I'm not him. His voice sounded a little lonely. Amon put a hand on his shoulder and said with a smile, Of course you're not him. You're yourself in this world. But after all, you have witnessed their story. Do you understand? Hearing this, Medanzo seemed to be deep in thought. He lowered his head and seemed to be in a trance for a moment. Amon's hand, which was on his shoulder, grabbed his arm. He smiled and said, Do you feel it? Your time is up. What did Amon mean? Time is up? Medanzo's magic power and cultivation had reached a sufficient level. At this moment he finally experienced the never-ending state of mind and was about to face the test of breaking through to the 9th level. Amon ordered Medanzo to return to the Garden of Eden immediately and not to return to the human world until he passed the test. Elmar and Rulio were to escort him. Elmar asked, Ammonius, we're all leaving. Where are you going? Ammonius smiled and said to Prince Binut, I've been to Babylon City before, but I didn't have the chance to climb the famous Tower of Babel. This time I want to visit it again. I wonder if the guards at the bottom of the tower will let me? Binut was startled, but then he realized that Amon was going to see Marduk. It was said that by climbing to the top of the Tower of Babel outside Babylon City, Marduk's palace on earth could directly summon the god. This was only a legend, and no one had the guts to try it. But Amon, as a god, could go to Marduk. He bowed and replied, Are you going to Babylon City? It's my honor to be with you. Amon went to Babylon City accompanied by Prince Binut, while General Robin stayed on the west bank of the Lys River to lead the army in defense. He was not only the head of the Babylon Legion, but Binut also temporarily appointed him as the commander-in-chief of the defense line. As for Binut himself, he couldn't stay on the front lines because the king was seriously ill, and he had to be ready to inherit the throne at any time. Princess Sisela had already given up the idea of fighting for the throne and left with Gilgamesh. No matter what Hammurabi's will was at present, only Prince Binut could control the Babylon kingdom. Goliath's judgment was right. On the second day after Seneca's assassination, the Assyrian Empire urgently mobilized its army to the Lys River to confront the Babylon army led by General Robin across the river. Both sides were on high alert. At present, the two countries were in a state of peace, so this kind of mobilization was unusual. Moreover, the Assyrian army seemed to be in a hurry. On his way back to Babylon City, Prince Binut had been paying attention to the Assyrian Empire's news. There was no way the Assyrian Empire wouldn't announce something as big as Seneca's assassination. If Gilgamesh was exposed as the assassin, Prince Binut was already prepared to deal with the Assyrian emissaries. 3 days later, the news of Seneca's assassination came. It was an announcement from Queen Samir, but the content of the announcement surprised Binut. It was said that the invincible Assyrian Emperor Seneca was seriously injured in a battle and was currently recuperating in the city of Lys. As for his enemy, the Assyrian Empire's announcement did not mention Gilgamesh, nor did it mention Goliath or Medanzo. It only mentioned the name of a god, Ammonius. Seneca was clearly sent flying by Gilgamesh, and Ammon didn't even lay a finger on him. How did Ammon get the blame? Samir naturally had her reasons for making such an announcement. No matter who she hated in her heart, her priority was to maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire. She couldn't allow the empire to fall into chaos because of Seneca's assassination. From the Assyrian Empire's announcement, it didn't mention how serious Seneca's injuries were. It gave the impression that he would recover after some treatment. In order to control the Assyrian Empire, Samir had to rely on Seneca's name to protect the emperor's glory. Only when the invincible Assyrian emperor was injured by a god would his prestige and the prestige of the empire be tarnished. Even if it wasn't Ammon who did it, it had to be Ammon. The announcement stated that there was an earth-shattering battle between Emperor Seneca and Ammonius. Although Seneca was injured, he managed to severely injure the god and forced him to flee. There was some truth in this. Ammon was indeed injured, and he damaged his own mana to escape to the west bank of the Lys River. But that was not Seneca's doing. As for not mentioning Goliath's name, there was another reason. If the Assyrian Empire didn't pursue the matter, where would the dignity of the empire go? But if they pursued the matter, with Goliath's status in the Hittite kingdom, it would mean that the Assyrian Empire didn't have the strength to attack Hittite. Although Emperor Seneca had this plan, it was only a wish for the future. Seneca was extremely cruel and infamous. Countless people on this continent hated him to the bone. No matter who succeeded in assassinating Seneca, they would become a hero who was praised and sincerely thanked by the people. They would have unimaginable glory. But now, all the glory belonged to Ammon alone. Even his disciple Medanzo didn't get a share. Who knew what kind of bitter smile Ammon would show when he heard this? But the Assyrian Empire's upper echelons in the city of Lys couldn't laugh. Only they knew how badly Seneca was injured. Rather than saying that he was still alive, it was better to say that he was a walking corpse that could barely breathe. According to the news from the palace, although Emperor Seneca couldn't move or speak, he hadn't completely lost consciousness. Only the sage of the empire could communicate with his majesty through the soul. Currently, Seneca was being guarded day and night by the sage of the empire's priests, who took turns to cast magic to keep him alive. The empire's upper echelons were currently concerned about one thing: who would inherit Emperor Seneca's throne. No matter what kind of will he made, it seemed that only Faust could pass it on. Some people also suspected that Emperor Seneca wasn't fully conscious, but Faust's words would become the emperor's orders. Even his will could be fabricated. But no one dared to openly question it, because the regent Empress Samir trusted the sage of the empire very much. Seneca was assassinated in the city of Tunis, far away from the Assyrian Empire. The incident happened so suddenly that the Assyrian Empire was left without a leader. At this time, the sage of the empire, Faust, passed on the emperor's order to let Empress Samir become the regent. If there were no accidents, Samir would be the one to control the empire in the future. No matter who wanted to control the Assyrian Empire, they had to deal with three forces. First, they had to deal with the priests who represented the divine right. Most importantly, they had to get the support of Faust, who supported Samir with all his might. Secondly, they had to deal with the military. They couldn't afford to let anything happen to the military at this time. Samir immediately transferred a large number of the empire's soldiers to Lisbon, in the name of preventing a counterattack from the kingdom of Babylon. The third force was the nobles and bureaucrats. No matter who they supported, their first choice was to protect their own interests. Most of the opportunists were also looking at the attitudes of the clergy and the military. As long as Sinek was still alive, Samir's regency wouldn't be an obstacle. But everyone was concerned about the same thing. Would Sinek die? When would he die? Late at night, two people were having a secret discussion in the palace. They were Faust and Samir. Samir sat in the middle of the hall where Sinek used to sit. Faust obviously had a seat, but he stood there and bowed as he spoke. Samuel asked, "How long can you maintain His Majesty's life?" Faust replied, "If the clergy take turns taking care of him, there shouldn't be a problem for half a year. I can even keep him alive." After thinking for a while, he carefully added, "It's impossible for His Majesty to wake up. He can die at any time. It's up to you to decide when he'll leave this world." Samir's expression was a little sad. His life doesn't belong to him anymore. It only has symbolic meaning to others. He needs to stay alive until the situation stabilizes. His life's pursuit was to make the world tremble under his hooves. He did it, but he didn't expect it to end like this, did he? The all-powerful Emperor Sinek of Assur, at the peak of his fame and achievements, ended up in a situation where he could neither live nor die. If he was still conscious, what would he think? Faust looked at Empress Samir and cautiously reminded her, "Whether the situation in the empire can be stabilized or not depends on what we do. Everyone is trying to figure out your attitude and what kind of national policy you will adopt after you take power. Have you considered it?" Samir's eyes seemed to be looking into the distant void. He did not answer the question. The reason why we stopped Sinek's atrocities was because we did not want to see the disaster that his brutality would bring. Other than pity for the innocent, there was also a deeper fear in his words. "Do you know what this fear is, sage imperial tutor?" Faust could vaguely feel a stabbing pain in his soul. It was the imprint left by Shandan that had been inadvertently touched, causing him to feel an indescribable burning desire. However, he lowered his head and replied, "I'd like to hear the details." Samir continued, "We are afraid of ourselves. We are afraid that we will have to wield our weapons forever, until we collapse from exhaustion. We are also afraid that we will suffer the same fate in the future. We will accept the same fate as those who were brutally slaughtered. Wherever the Assur's iron hooves passed, the more pain there was, the more hatred there was. In the history of the continent, there has never been an empire that could remain invincible forever. When Assur was weak, although it suffered a lot, it was not brutally slaughtered. When it was strong, it was surrounded by corpses. If the cycle of history brought Assur back to its former glory, would it still be able to exist? I saw fear in the depths of Seneca's heart. He might not have noticed it before, but it must be very strong now. This fear is also rooted in the soul of all Assur's conquerors, although they are unwilling to touch it. They are afraid that one day, they will be trampled and slaughtered like the people they once conquered. Faust couldn't help but shiver, but the scorching feeling in his soul became even more intense. Sudan's words echoed in his mind again. "A person's belief has always been the master of his heart. I'm just asking you to examine your heart. Please release your desire and tell yourself how to fulfill it." So he coughed and said, "Your Majesty, I want to tell you a story. There was a world where there were two families. One was prosperous and rich, while the other was weak and poor. They were very far apart, but one day, they finally met. The poor envied the prosperous. Then one day, the prosperous family fell ill. The other family rushed into their house, robbed them of their wealth, and slaughtered their wives and children. From then on, there was a deep fear in the world. The slaughterer feared that the other family would recover from their illness, and feared that he would become strong again. If that happened, it would mean that his sins would be settled, his wealth would be plundered, and his family would be slaughtered. That was what he had done. He dared not repent, nor could he disobey. He would not and could not truly confess his sins. He could not return the wealth he stole, and he could not atone for his sins with his actions. He could only consolidate his power and try to weaken the other forever, taking everything he had. Every time the other party recovered from his illness, he would think of another massacre and robbery. The idea is simple. Because you are weak, you have to bear it. Because you are recovering, you are a threat to me. Chapter 252. Faust sighed. It's a pity that the world is like this. Perhaps on the day of the apocalypse, the gods will judge the world. Samir's expression changed slightly. That's Seneca's world, and cynic has ushered in his doom. Are you trying to say that everyone in the world has a cynic in their heart? Don't forget that we're discussing the national policy of Assyria, not the end of the world. Faust bowed apologetically. Your Majesty, forgive me for straying from the topic. Let's go back to the discussion just now. We should first maintain the stability of the Assyrian Empire. It must not collapse. The Assyrian Empire may seem strong at the moment, but if it collapses, the fate of the Assyrian conquerors will fall upon their heads. The first thing we need to do is to consolidate our rule in the occupied territories. At present, we can no longer expand. Even if there comes a day when we can't hold these territories anymore and have to retreat, we can't return them to Babylon. We can encourage the people to divide and conquer, provoking civil strife and plunging them into eternal chaos. Samir frowned slightly. You're guessing the future, but I'm asking about the present. Faust whispered, but I'm worried about the future. Do you think that in the near future, the Assyrian army will still be able to maintain the fighting strength and will they had when Cynic was alive? Samir sighed and replied, of course not. Cynic had been preparing for more than a decade, and the people of the Assyrian Empire had tightened their belts and trained such a powerful army. What was the purpose? It was to conquer. But what was the purpose of conquering? The Assyrian warriors had become the new nobles, plundering a lot of wealth, owning large tracts of land and hordes of slaves. Their extravagance was spreading day by day. Even if they were brave warriors now, what would happen in a few years? What would happen to their next generation? Apart from cruelty, what would they have left for this world? After a sigh, Samir continued, whether it's the end of the world or the tomorrow of the Assyrian Empire, what you're talking about today is today's national policy. Faust muttered, we need to digest and assimilate the occupied cities as soon as possible, and the focus is on consolidating the benefits we've gained so that all forces can benefit. I once formulated a national policy for Emperor Shinnik, but he did not completely adopt it. Now, there's no need to update it. If Prime Minister Alpha also supports this, then there is only one thing left. Samuel asked calmly, what's the matter? Let His Majesty Cynic choose the most suitable time to die, and you will become the Queen of Assyria. If you want to save the fate of the empire, you must take control of it yourself. I'm just a warrior, and a woman at that. How can I become the great emperor of Assyria? Samir looked a little doubtful. Faust raised his head and looked at Samuel with a passionate gaze. I will support you with all my strength. In my heart, you will always be my queen. Faust looked up at Samuel and said. Samir avoided his gaze and waved his hand. Lord Imperial Tutor, I understand what you mean. It's getting late and you should be tired. Please go back and rest. Faust wanted to say something, but he had no choice but to leave. When he reached the door, Samir suddenly called out to him, wait. Faust quickly turned around and looked at Samuel. My queen, what else can I do for you? Samuel looked at him with a questioning gaze and slowly asked, you are the most knowledgeable person in the empire. As far as you know, is there any way to cure Cynic? Tell me the truth, don't hide anything. Faust sighed slightly and replied, Your Majesty, as far as I know, there is indeed a magic that can cure Seneca's injury. It is the blessing of Isis performed by the adoratress of the temple of Isis of Igut. Other than that, no other magic in the world can cure him. Samuel was stunned for a moment, then said, "That's as good as not saying anything." Faust continued, "This may really be the will of the gods. Regarding this matter, did the gods send down an oracle?" Samuel asked meaningfully, "Which god are you referring to, Lord Imperial Tutor?" Faust bowed his head and replied, "Enlil." Samuel said non-committally, "The announcement I made was in accordance with the instructions of Enril's oracle. At least on the surface, none of us have violated Enril's oracle, right?" Faust said, "According to Enril's oracle, the announcement only mentioned one Ammonius, and let him bear all the responsibility. This is clearly to let the Assyrian Empire continue to fight against Talancheng. If you ascend to the throne, but do not launch an expedition to retaliate against Talancheng, I'm afraid some people in the empire will not be satisfied." Samuel asked again, "Lord Imperial Tutor, what do you think of this matter?" Faust took a step forward from the doorway and replied, "This is a dilemma. You are now in power, and the best choice is to transfer the main force of the imperial army to Lisbon to monitor it. If you send the army back to the Assyrian Empire and then cross the plateau, I'm afraid it will be out of control. But if you do not avenge Emperor Cynic, you will not be able to quell the voices of doubt and opposition, and you will not be able to gain the support of all sides. There is a risk of internal division in the empire." Samuel waved his hand again and said, "I know what to do. You can go and rest." Faust thought that Samir would have more to say or something else when he stopped him. He did not expect that Samir would still ask him to leave after asking two simple questions. He did not have the chance to say what he wanted to say the most in his heart. He had given Samuel enough hints, expressed his feelings for her, and tried to let Samuel understand what he meant to her now, but Samuel did not respond. When Faust walked out of the inner hall, he could not help but think to himself, "Do I need to make things clearer? But if I do that, it will not be an expression of love, but a threat." Faust was conflicted. Close to the Babylon River, there was a towering tower that reached into the clouds. It was called the Tower of Babel by the people of Babylon, and it was officially called the Gate of God in the kingdom. The tower had a history of hundreds of years. It had been carefully built by the successive kings of Babylon, and it was a wonder on the continent. The tower was a huge multi-storied platform, with a total of 9 floors. Each floor was more than 30 feet high, and there was a spiral staircase that led to the top of the tower. At the entrance of the tower was Marduk's shrine, and on the 9th floor of the tower was either the shrine with the statue of the god or the palace of the god Marduk in the human world. No one would erect a statue of himself in his home for worship, because he himself was the god. According to legend, the top of the tower was the gate to the divine kingdom. The successive king of Babylon had built a residence for the god Marduk in the human world. According to the ideals of secular life, people served the god like an emperor and selected young and beautiful women of the kingdom to live here to accompany Marduk. Only the king and the high priest of the kingdom had the right to enter the top of the tower at will, symbolizing that they could listen to the teachings of the god face to face, but even they could not enter the bedroom of the great god Marduk. The lower 8 floors of the tower also required the permission of the main shrine of the kingdom to enter, and usually only the high priests had the right to enter the tower. But today there was a very special guest. Accompanied by Prince Vonnet, he passed through Marduk's shrine to the bottom of the tower and asked the guards to retreat to the side. When the prince walked over, he deliberately took 2 steps back to follow the man. If this man wanted to reach the top of the tower, even if it was Prince Vonnet's will, it would still be against the kingdom's laws. Perhaps the priests guarding the lower 8 floors would not be willing to let him go. But Prince Vonnet did not order the priests to let him go. He just asked the guards to retreat and respectfully walked the man to the foot of the tower. The man stepped into the void, and the next moment he appeared at the top of the tower. This towering tower was reached in 1 step by Ammon. It was hard to imagine that the craftsman of the mortal world could create such a miracle. This tower was built by chiseling an entire stone mountain into a conical shape, and the top was flattened. Ascending to the top of the tower, there was a magnificent palace. Outside the palace were guards guarding the door, and inside the palace were palace maids. Ammon did not enter the door, nor did he greet anyone. He took 1 step to the top of the tower, and then disappeared with a 2nd step. Wendy and Hairuya walked into Marduk's bedroom in a thin embroidered dress, her curvaceous body faintly discernible. It was now the afternoon nap time for Marduk, and she was going to serve the god for his afternoon nap. Although she had been here for 3 years, she had never seen the legendary great god, but she could not slack off in all the daily rituals. She walked into the luxurious bedroom, first knelt to the big bed, knelt on the ground, and untied the embroidered dress, leaving only the tassels on her chest and lower abdomen, then got up and lay on the left side of the big bed. Every afternoon she had to do the same thing. She washed her body with warm water mixed with spices, and served the non-existent god to sleep. For the subjects of the Kingdom of Babylon, this may be a legendary sacred ritual, but Wendy's heart was already numb, and it was just a mechanical action repeated every day. When she lay down, she did not feel tired at all. Every day, besides eating, praying, bathing, changing clothes, and sleeping, she had nothing else to do, and could not leave the top of the tower. She was chosen from the people, a woman who served the god Marduk, and lived in the gate of God that led to the divine kingdom, and could not leave the Tower of Babel. The feeling she had when she first climbed the tower 3 years ago had now faded, as if it was a matter of hundreds of years ago. Now that she thought about it, there was no happiness or excitement, but more unease and fear. But 3 years had passed, and she felt like a shell, beautiful and sexy, but soulless. Now that the fear had disappeared, she did not even care if she was dead or alive. Lying on the soft bed, she muttered to herself, "Mart, everyone calls you the great god, but where are you? I have never seen you. The so-called saintess of Babylon who came here before me, they did not even see you until they died. It is said in the world that the saintess of Babylon will forever maintain her youth and beauty. Yes, every day I receive the blessing of the priests to protect my delicate face. But what people do not know is that almost all the saintesses of Babylon will die before their youth is over, because there is nothing left for them to live for. People call me the saintess of Babylon, but they do not know that I am actually a prisoner of Babylon, a prisoner forever imprisoned in this palace, unable to walk out of the palace gate at the top of the tower. Marduk, if you are a god, you should be able to hear my voice. Please release your prisoner. If you are unwilling, you can even end my meaningless life. Are you the legendary saintess of Babylon? Very beautiful indeed." A man's voice suddenly rang out from the bedroom. Wendy cried out in surprise and jumped up from the bed, the tips of her nipples drawing an elastic curve under the tassels on her chest. She stared at the person who had suddenly appeared, dumbfounded. He was a young man with sharp facial features. His mouth had a resolute expression, but his gaze was gentle. He was well-built and his face was handsome. He wore a light white linen robe, and his body was untainted by even a speck of dust. The door to the bedroom had always been closed, but he had appeared out of thin air in front of the bed. No man could enter this bedroom, not even the king or the high priest of the kingdom. The people who took care of Wendy's daily life were all palace maids of the Divine Gate. The palace maids were rotated every year, unlike Wendy who had to stay here forever. She envied those palace maids. As the saintess of Babylon of the Divine Gate, she was a woman who served the gods. Of course, she should not be disrespectful to the gods. But Wendy did not care anymore. All this was just a meaningless waste of her life. Today, she finally said the words in her heart, and then she heard a man's voice and saw him appear in front of the bed. Wendy's shock was indescribable, and when she reacted, she hurriedly jumped out of bed, prostrated herself on the ground and kissed the carpet in front of Amon's feet, saying in a trembling voice, "Great God Marduk, you have finally appeared. Please forgive me for my disrespect, but that is indeed my heart. If you want to punish me or even end my life, Wendy will not complain." The person who came was not Marduk, but Amon who had come to visit the Divine Gate. Amon looked at her, and for some reason, the expression in his eyes was very complicated, containing gentle regret and even painful memories. He waved his hand, and an invisible force lifted Wendy up out of thin air. He said as gently as possible, "You have not answered my question yet. Are you the saintess of Babylon?" Wendy trembled and replied, "Yes, my name is Wendy, the woman who serves you here. The saintess of Babylon used to be someone else, but now it is me. What touched Amon's heart was the title of Saintess, but the so-called Saintess of Babylon in front of him was completely different from the Saintess of Isis, of the Empire of Igut. The Saintess of Isis was the chief high priest of the Lower Empire, and Wendy was just a poor prisoner in the Tower of Babylon. But when he heard the title of Saintess, Amon could not help but think of Maria. He had also heard Wendy's voice just now, and he knew what kind of torment this beautiful girl was suffering in her heart to say such disrespectful words to the gods. He also thought of Maria, who also lived in the invisible cage of fate, and he could not even touch her. This god had an inexplicable wish in his heart, and he wanted to save this poor girl and fulfill her wish, just to remember the eternal Maria in his heart. Thinking of this, Amon did not reveal anything about his identity. Wendy had mistaken him for someone else, and he was not Marduk, but there was one thing that was right: he was indeed a god. Amon sat down on the spacious and comfortable chair in the bedroom, and said in a mysterious and serene tone, "Wendy, the gods have heard your voice, and have appeared before you. Please tell me, is what you said just now your wish? Have you ever thought about what you will face when you leave this Tower of Babylon?" Wendy raised her beautiful face and replied timidly, "Please forgive me, I still can't believe that the gods have really appeared before me, and I don't know what to say. You look completely different from what I imagined." Amon smiled, and secretly cast magic to calm Wendy's overwhelmed emotions. He sat there and replied, "You don't have to worry about what I look like. Different gods may appear in different appearances. In the presence of the gods, you only need to say your prayers." Wendy gradually calmed down, and as if she had gathered her courage, she bowed her head and replied, "You have heard my prayers. As for what it is like under the Tower of Babylon, I am not ignorant, because I grew up there and came from there. If you think that my thoughts are a betrayal of the gods, I would rather accept the punishment, because I really do think that way." Amon asked again, "Where are you from in the kingdom of Babylon?" Wendy replied, "I grew up in the city of Lys." Amon's heart sank slightly and he had to say, "Don't you know that the city of Lys, your hometown, is no longer there? The Assyrian Empire captured the city and carried out a brutal massacre." Wendy finally could not help but shake her shoulders and began to sob. "Of course I know, I heard it clearly when the high priest climbed to the top of the tower and prayed to the gods. I thought that my soul had become numb after coming to the gate of God, only then did I know that I could still shed tears. I prayed to the gods over and over again, but it did not save my hometown. It was then that the thoughts I had just now sprouted in my heart. God, if you cannot save the city of Lys, why did you imprison me here?" Amon sighed. His sigh was desolate and helpless. He shook his head. "I did not destroy the city of Lys, it was the army of the mortal empire, and I did not imprison you here, it was the priests of the kingdom of Babylon. I can help you fulfill your wish, but tell me, beautiful girl, what can you do after leaving this place?" Wendy replied, "My father was a gardener, and the best gardener in the city of Lys. I can cultivate all kinds of flowers and trees, and know how to prune them to make them grow stronger. I can also process fresh flowers into all kinds of fragrant ornaments. I can also cultivate the seeds of all kinds of plants, I can embroider, I can help you fulfill your wish. I can also cut clothes and..." Chapter 253. Wendy blinked her long eyelashes, stood up straight and said, "Please ask, I will answer truthfully." Amon's aura was imperceptibly filled with the solemnity of the gods, but he still said with a smile, "When you climb this tower, you realize that the gate of the gods is not what you think it is just a cage of life. But before you came here, besides all, you must have longed for it. If this is really the gate to the divine kingdom, what is your wish?" Wendy's bright eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of light. She narrowed her eyes and said, "Of course I hope that the gods can take me to the divine kingdom, to enjoy the legendary happiness of leaving the mortal world. God, please tell me, can mortals enter the divine kingdom in heaven, even after death?" Such a simple question, but Amon, as a god, was stunned. Ever since he left Duk in his youth, he had been trying to solve the riddle left to him by Crazy Ol. Can a person become a god? How can one become a god? Now, he already had an answer, because he himself had become a deity and had proven this path. But this answer could not solve Wendy's problem. It could be seen that this pure and beautiful girl was not suitable to practice body arts, nor was she a mage. It was already extremely difficult for people to break through to the higher realms, let alone become a god. Even as a god, Amon had never been to any divine kingdom, and it was even more impossible for mortals to leave this world and reach the eternity where neither life nor death existed. But Wendy's words made Amon think about another question, related to his vow, and also related to his experience in the underworld. Is it possible to create a world and become the home of the soul? That short moment is like an eternity, that is the heaven of the dream, or the hell in the heart. The people there are not gods, but souls after death cannot freely enter the eternal world. They can enter the eternal world in the moment after death, and perhaps they can leave again. Thinking of so many things, Amon said to Wendy kindly, I am also thinking about your question, and I hope to answer it in the future. As for now, I'm here to meet another god. Could you please go out and close the door? When I leave, I will help you leave the gate of God and go to the human world where you want to go. Wendy walked out of Marduk's bedroom and closed the door, and the maids on duty in the outer hall were all startled and hurried forward to greet her. Lady Adoratress, what happened? How can you come out? Although Wendy had been attending to Marduk's afternoon nap every day for the past 3 years, she had never seen the deity appear in person. But she made sure to stay in bed for as long as necessary, according to the prescribed rituals. She came out before the time limit was up. This was something that had never happened in the Gate of God. The palace maids were all shocked. Wendy suppressed her excitement and said as calmly as she could, the god wants to meet another god here, and doesn't want anyone to disturb them. The palace maids covered their chests in unison, all petrified, and after a moment, they knelt down in unison towards the door of the inner hall. Someone shouted, Lady Adoratress, according to the ancient ritual, when the god descends, the bell on the top of the tower must be rung. Wendy was startled, a little hesitant, but then she showed a very dignified expression. This was the first time in 3 years that she had spoken in the tone of the Adoratress of Baron. The god said not to disturb, even if it is a ritual prescribed by the kingdom. The bell on the Tower of Babel did not ring in the end, but a palace maid rushed to the outside of the palace and went down the tower to report the news of the god's arrival to the priests. Amon watched Wendy walk around the screen and out of the bedroom and close the door. Suddenly, he sensed something and turned his head to see Marduk sitting in another chair looking at him with a faint smile. Seeing Amon turn his head, Marduk said in a joking tone, You think I don't know that you like to kidnap people to my place? Amon sighed. That girl is known as the Adoratress of Baron, but she is not really treated as a person, just a gift that will never be accepted. Why do you bother doing this? Marduk shook his head. This is not done by me, but by the kings and priests of Babylon. Amon also shook his head. But all this happened under your nose. For hundreds of years, why do you bother to imprison so many beautiful youths here? Marduk curled the corner of his mouth slightly. This is the sacrifice of the world to express their faith, and as the king of the kingdom, I should allow them to choose their own way. If you like that girl, feel free to take her away. Except for Murin, who may be a little unhappy, no other god will care about this matter. Amon added, Since you did not stop the kingdom of Babylon from using this method of sacrifice, and they are here to serve you, at least. Marduk suddenly laughed, interrupting Amon with a chuckle. Ammonius, are you a man? Amon was taken aback. Of course I am. Marduk, what you just said is that your thinking is still limited by the times of the world, but I am a person who has long since transcended, or rather, I have already surpassed the times of the tower. I believe that men and women are equal. What about you? Amon frowned. I think so too, but what do you mean by that? Marduk put his hands on the back of the chair and crossed his legs, shaking his toes as he said unhurriedly, If there is a beautiful woman, all the men in the world want to have sex with such a woman. So the people elect a man and let him sleep with the woman. Do you think it is necessary for the woman to agree? Amon said coldly, Of course not, it is ridiculous. Marduk slapped the back of the chair and said, Isn't that right? I am such a handsome, strong, and charismatic man. Do you think they can take advantage of me just because they choose a woman who has nothing to do with me? Of course I don't even want to see her. If you believe that men and women are equal, you should naturally think so. Even Aman, who had never been one to laugh, couldn't help but be amused by Marduk at this moment. After laughing, he asked, "What will you do after I take Wendy away?" Marduk stopped smiling and said lightly, "I won't do anything. The kingdom of Babylon will choose another adoratress and send her here to complete their ceremony." Aman was just about to continue when Marduk suddenly waved his hand. He heard the prayers of countless people and saw their images. Those who struggled on the edge of suffering, slavery, and life and death prayed to Marduk. What many people looked forward to was Wendy's life in the gate of God, a luxurious palace, hordes of servants, the best food and clothes in the world automatically delivered to her, never having to worry or work. Marduk curled his lips again and said, "You said that the gate of God is the cage of Wendy's fate, but the world under this tower is a cage for countless people. Wendy wants to leave, but too many people think of the cage she is in. Then they think of another way. As a god, you can't save everyone. If you have ears, you'd better think about the bigger cage. You didn't come to the gate of God for Wendy, let's get down to business. How are you going to kill Enlil? Do you already have a plan?" Aman replied, "If I didn't have a plan, I wouldn't have come to the gate of God to see you. Enlil will definitely be waiting for me to show up, and where do you think he will send people to monitor my movements at any time?" Marduk looked at Aman and did not answer the question. "You were injured by the combined forces of the god of flame and the god of ash, and your strength has been figured out by Enlil. Looking at you, it seems that your magic hasn't recovered yet?" Aman nodded. "Yes, I need to find the most suitable place in the world for training, and one that is absolutely safe." Marduk asked again, "You have not received guidance from any divine clan, so naturally you will not go to the divine realm, but you should have a divine palace in the world, right?" Aman nodded again and said, "Yes, I have a divine palace called the Garden of Eden, but it is not fully built yet." Marduk's smile was a little mysterious. "Then the best place for you to recuperate is the palace of Murin." Aman also smiled. "So I know where Enlil will be waiting for me, and as soon as I appear, he will naturally be able to find my whereabouts." Marduk added, "Once he makes a move, he will not give others a chance to save you. Your current state is a little worrying, and I'm afraid you won't be able to do it until you have fully recovered your strength." Aman pointed around and said, "That's why I came to the gate of God, not just to see you. I have to say that this tower is very well built, and this is the most suitable place on earth for gods to recuperate. It is also the most suitable place for me to cultivate and recover my strength, and it is very safe." Marduk laughed again. "Ah, Aman, you really know how to take advantage of me, abducting the Virgin of Baron, and even borrowing the palace." Aman said with a straight face, "You can refuse." Marduk's figure slowly disappeared, his laughter still echoing in the bedroom. "How could I refuse? Compared to the risk you took to lure Enlil to attack, my sacrifice seems to be too little. You can try to recover your strength here, and in order to thank you for your success in assassinating Cynic, I can give you a choice, either take Wendy away, or make another request of me." Aman replied indifferently, "There is no need to make another request, I have promised Wendy that I will take her away." Something big had happened. Something big. A god has descended into the palace on earth, and is living there. For the first time, the palace built by the king of Babylon to serve Marduk has its original purpose. Except for Wendy, the Virgin of Baron, no one has seen a god, but some people have heard the voice of the god in their souls. The god wants to live in the gate of God for a period of time. He didn't want to be disturbed, and he didn't want the news to leak. Because the god had sent down an oracle, the ordinary people naturally did not know the news, but they were curious about why the temple of Marduk under the Tower of Babel had been holding all kinds of sacrificial ceremonies for days, and the high officials and priests of the kingdom had ascended the Tower of Babel. The powerful lords climbed the tower, but could not enter the palace, and could only worship and pray outside the palace. All the daily life of the god in the inner palace was taken care of by Wendy, the Virgin of Baron, and the palace maids could only serve in the outer palace. Every word that Wendy conveyed was treated as an oracle. Everyone thought that Marduk had descended, and only a few people in the kingdom knew that it was Ammonius. Ammon was sent by Prince Binut, but His Royal Highness did not expect that this god would occupy the palace and the Virgin of Baron, and live in the Tower of Babel so openly. Marduk did not seem to have sent down an oracle to express his opposition, so Prince Binut had to keep quiet. Ammon lived in the Gate of God for several months, meditating in peace without anyone disturbing him. Wendy took care of his daily life. In fact, Ammon did not need her to take care of anything, but at least it was much more convenient to have someone around. Ammon also told Wendy the truth that he was not Marduk, but Ammonius. When Wendy learned the truth, she was stunned for a long time, then suddenly fell in front of Ammon's feet, hugged his legs, and burst into tears. The high priest of the kingdom had held a prayer ceremony in the front hall of the Gate of God not long ago, and this ceremony was traditionally presided over by Wendy, the Virgin of Baron. Wendy had also heard the latest news. Ammonius had sent down a punishment, and the Assyrian Emperor Sinek was dying and would soon die. The prayer of the high priest of Baron was different from the announcement issued by the Assyrian Empire. Of course, it was said in the words that the god liked to hear, and it was closer to the truth. The Assyrian Emperor Sinek destroyed Wendy's hometown, Lisbon, and Ammonius' punishment of Sinek was tantamount to avenging Wendy. The god in front of me is the most grateful Ammonius. How could Wendy not be excited? Ammon helped Wendy up and asked, "Why are you crying so sadly when you heard that I am not Marduk?" At this moment, Wendy had forgotten her fear of the gods and did not even think about whether she was being rude, so she simply hugged Ammon and sobbed in his chest. "It's you assassinated the tyrant Sinek. I will be forever grateful to you in this life. No matter what I do, I will never be able to repay you." Although she was crying loudly, Wendy was more overjoyed. If she had known that a god would come to the Gate of God, she would have preferred to be Meng instead of Marduk. Since Ammon lived here, Wendy had completely come to life, as if her soul had awakened, and she was no longer a beautiful shell. She still stayed at the top of the tower and could not go out, but the feeling was completely different, full of the youthful aura of a young girl. Although Ammon did not deliberately say anything, Wendy did not point out to anyone that the god in the inner hall was not Marduk but Ammon. Anyway, everyone thought it was Marduk, so let it be so. Even Marduk himself did not show up to object, so what else was there for others to say? Prince Binut had always been aware of this matter, and the king of Babylon, Hammurabi II, also learned the inside story from Prince Binut. One day, 3 months later, Wendy walked into the inner hall and told Ammon that Prince Binut and the high priest of the kingdom were outside the palace asking the gods for permission, hoping that he could see the king. The king should have come in person, but he was seriously ill and bedridden, so he specially presented the most precious gift of the kingdom, asking the gods to bless him in person. During this period of time, Ammon lived in the Gate of God as a god, and in addition to concentrating on recovering his strength, he also gained other things. He received all kinds of valuable gifts from the nobles of the kingdom of Babylon, which added up to a staggering amount of wealth. He could not refuse these gifts. If Wendy went out to pass on his message and refused, those people would be so scared that they would break out in a cold sweat and even want to jump off the tower. These gifts, in addition to many luxurious utensils and treasures, were a large number of special parangons. Although the kingdom of Babylon was greatly weakened after the defeat, the wealth of the nobles in the kingdom was not affected much. Many of them were quite generous with their gifts, and naturally, they would choose the most precious gifts to give to the gods. Ammon happened to be in need of money. He did not have much use for the money himself, but this wealth was extremely important to the current city of Talon. In recent years, the construction and conquest of Murin's treasure had long been used up. Although Talon also produced resources, the current output was far less than the consumption of war and construction. The city's finances were already on the verge of being exhausted. It was just the right time to take this money back to Aesop, which could solve the urgent problems of Talon. Ammon really made a lot of money from Marduk. Since he had received such a large amount of wealth from the kingdom of Babylon, and the gift from the king was the most precious of all, Ammon did not want to give face to the king. And according to Wendy's message, Prince Binut knew that he was Ammonius and not Marduk, but he was still eager to see this god. Aman asked Wendy to tell Binut outside the hall to stop a carriage at the foot of the tower and not to disturb anyone else. He would appear directly in the carriage. That evening, Prince Binut's carriage surrounded by his guards left the Tower of Babel, followed by the carriage and guards of the high priest of the kingdom. The unrelated people bowed and saluted, and Aman's carriage drove directly into the palace. Even when entering the palace gate, he did not stop to dismount. This was a courtesy that only a distinguished guest could receive. In the carriage, Aman asked Binut, "Your uncle knows that I am not Marduk, and not the god his kingdom believes in, so why is he so eager to see me?" Binut sighed and said, "A king wants to see a god when he is seriously ill. Do you think there is anything else?" This sentence revealed the mentality of many ancient emperors in their later years. They already had all the glory and splendor in the world, and could use power and wealth to fulfill all kinds of wishes. However, there was one desire that could never be satisfied, and that was when the end of their lives came, they would die like those lowly peasants. At this time, they would often pray to the gods for the prescription of immortality, and the seriously ill kings would hope that the gods could use their divine power to help them come back from the dead. If all these could not be achieved, their prayers would not change, but in a different form, praying that they could still enjoy everything in life after death and continue to be kings in another world. Chapter 254. In the palace of Babylon, Aman saw Hammurabi II lying on his sickbed. This old king was nearly 80 years old. He used to be very stout, but now he was very thin. The skin on his cheeks and chin were wrinkled and drooped. His eyes were sunken in, and his cheekbones and forehead had an abnormal red luster. Seeing this luster, Aman knew that this person was already sick. If he was an ordinary person, he would have died a long time ago. He had been relying on the various blessings performed by the priests to keep him alive. But no matter how magical the power of the magic was, it could only adjust a person's bodily functions to the best state. When these functions were exhausted, even the most brilliant blessings masters could not do anything. Hammurabi II was in a half-asleep, half-unconscious state. He lay there with his mouth half open, gasping for breath. It seemed that he was struggling to wait for something. When Aman walked in, he suddenly opened his eyes. A strong luster of desire appeared in his turbid eyes. His shoulders and elbows moved, as if he wanted to get up from the bed. The priests guarding the sickbed exclaimed in a low voice, "His Majesty is awake." Aman said softly, "Your Majesty, you don't have to sit up." As he spoke, he flicked his finger, and the abnormal blush on Hammurabi II's face disappeared. His face returned to its previous deathly pale color. However, his mind was completely clear, and he could speak clearly. Lying on the sickbed, Hammurabi II said in an old voice, "God, please forgive me for my rudeness. The pain is tormenting me like a poisonous snake biting my body. I can already feel that the poison has spread to every corner of my body. I can't get up and kneel before your feet. Thank you for coming here in person. I pray for your blessing. All things wither and flourish. The trees that lose their yellow leaves in autumn seem to die in winter. But when the earth returns to spring, they will be rejuvenated. It is said that this is the power of God to awaken all things. Dear God, please bestow this power on me. I will be your servant forever." Aman had guessed correctly. The moment Hammurabi II opened his mouth, he prayed to the gods to bring him back to life and restore his vitality. When Aman walked in, everyone in the room, except the king, knelt down before him, including Prince Binut and the chief high priest of the kingdom. The high priest was a little hesitant, but seeing that Prince Binut was also kneeling, he had no choice but to follow suit. Aman did not say anything. He reached out and pointed at King, who was lying on the sickbed. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Hammurabi II's body. The king's face regained its normal color. Miraculously, he found that he had regained his vigor in an instant, as if he had returned to the time when he was young and strong. He was so surprised that he jumped up from the bed and knelt in front of Aman, shouting in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Almighty God. You have given me a new life." When the others in the room saw this scene, they were shocked beyond words. Since ancient times, no one had ever heard of a god being able to bring an emperor back to life, but with a wave of God Amon's hand, he had truly brought the dying Hammurabi II back to life and back to life. Prince Binut's expression was very complicated. He was shocked, but it was hard to tell if he was confused or regretful. But Amon shook his head and said, "Trees wither and flourish, but there will be a day when they truly wither. The new leaf that sprouts every spring is not the same leaf that fell last year. A person's life will eventually come to an end. Perhaps the soul will be reborn in another way, but that will no longer be you, your Majesty King. I did not give you a new life. You feel full of strength now. That is my gratitude, and I am using my divine power to support you." During the trial of fate, the god's tear passed down by the adoratress of the temple of Isis had strangely merged with Amon's body and mind. Although he did not know the blessing of Isis, that only the adoratress could perform, he could perform another kind of magic, the protection of Isis, better than any other mage in the world. Amon used his own divine power to support Hammurabi II, allowing him to regain the vigor he had when he was young and strong. At the same time, he stimulated the last bit of potential in his life. His soul became sober and comfortable. But Amon could not stand here forever, shrouding Hammurabi II in his own golden light. As soon as he left, the king would fall again. A look of deep disappointment flashed across Hammurabi II's eyes, but it was immediately replaced by a stronger expectation. He knelt on the ground and raised his head, saying, "God, since you have such divine power, can I ask you to protect me like this, so that I can continue to be young and full of vigor?" Amon asked with no expression, "Your Majesty King, you asked me for a blessing and said that you wish to be my servant forever. I blessed you and allowed you to get up from your sickbed before your death, but you made such a request to me. If I put my light on you forever, wouldn't I become your servant forever? Even the empires on the continent cannot stay strong forever, let alone the life of a king." The king's request was too much, and the god was obviously unhappy. Hammurabi II lowered his head and said, "God, please forgive me. Can I ask you another thing? In the world after death, can souls enjoy eternal peace and happiness?" Zaman replied, "Why don't you just tell me your wish to be a king in the other world? But I want to ask you another question. If the kingdom in the other world really exists, and you met your grandfather, Hammurabi I, and the previous kings of Babylon, who would be able to enjoy the glory of that king? Would it be you? So the world you wish for doesn't exist. I can answer your question. Your departed soul will be received by the underworld of Anunnaki, so that the underworld king can hear your prayers and pleas, and from your spiritual imprint in this life, she will draw what she wants, and you will stay in the momentary darkness for what seems like an eternity. Your soul may have a new life, but it is meaningless to you. You are the only one who is meaningful to it. Understood?" Hammurabi II did not understand. He raised his head and asked, "A new life? What I want is a new life. May I ask who the new life will be?" Amon let out a helpless sigh. "The so-called new life is not you. When the autumn leaves rot in the dust will become fertile and nourish the trees to sprout in the spring. That is another living being, and you can understand it this way. If you really want to know who that person is, even the gods can't decide. Perhaps it is just such a living being. If this bird was once a king, does it mean anything to you?" Amon pointed to a parrot in a birdcage hanging by the palace gate and asked the king in front of him meaningfully. The king looked at the birdcage and was stunned. His lips moved slightly, but no one knew what he wanted to say. Amon turned and walked out of the palace gate as he said slowly, "It may be logical for you to have this kingdom, but you take it for granted. But have you ever thought about why you should enjoy all this forever? Go to the other people in the world. Maybe you can be them, and they can be you. Wear the golden light I bestow upon you and spend the last night of your life filled with youthful vigor. This is my gift to you." After saying this, Amon's figure disappeared in front of the palace gate. Hammurabi II was still kneeling there in the golden light. The next morning, the king of Babylon, Hammurabi II, passed away. The whole country mourned, and then it was followed by a celebration. They mourned the passing of the king, and celebrated the succession of the new king Binut I. On the same day that Hammurabi II passed away, another monarch fell on the continent. The new capital of the Assur Empire, Lisbon, announced that the invincible King Sinek of Assur had seriously injured Ammonius in battle, but he was ambushed by the evil god. Unfortunately, he was seriously injured and passed away. Sinek could have continued to live, but he could also die at any time. It all depended on when Samir decided to stop the magic circle protecting him. And the day had finally come. The sage imperial tutor, Lord Faust, read out Sinek's will in public as the chief high priest of the empire. He passed the throne to his most beloved queen, Samir, who had made countless meritorious deeds on the battlefield with him. As for whether Sinek, who was unconscious and unable to speak or move, could leave behind such a will, no one could say for sure. However, Lord Faust's words were the decree of the emperor. Was Samir really his most beloved queen? Not long ago, the emperor was about to marry another queen, Princess Sisela, but he was assassinated during the wedding ceremony. It was a great irony. Perhaps Sinek felt remorseful before his death and felt that Samir was the only one he could entrust the throne to. In any case, Samir had become a real queen. In fact, this will was just the icing on the cake. During this period of time, Samir had become the regent of the Assur Empire. She had control over the military forces at the front line, and at the same time, she had the support of the clergy group led by Faust. There were voices of opposition in the Assur Empire when the queen became the empress. There was another proposal from the nobles, which was to support Samir as the regent and make Sineka's 3-year-old son the new emperor. But this proposal was rejected by Sineka's will. There were also nobles who took the opportunity to make things difficult for Samir. Since they couldn't reject Sineka's will, then they would make an issue out of Sineka's assassination. Among these nobles was Lord Mantion, who rushed to Lisbon from Nineveh. The Mantion family was a great noble family of the Assur Empire. There were many local officials and generals who came from this family, and they had a complicated relationship with all kinds of forces in the imperial court. Lord Lloyd was also the highest-ranking official in the empire at present. Lord Mantion's grandfather used to be the prime minister of Assur. After his death, another noble family's representative, Alpha, was given an important position by Sinek and became the prime minister. In the battle between the two families, the Alpha family had the upper hand. Now that the Assur Empire had undergone such a huge change, all kinds of open and veiled struggles had begun. Lord Mantion didn't openly question the legitimacy of Samir's ascension to the throne. In the first court meeting that Samir held, Lord Mantion spoke passionately, "In order to maintain the glory of the empire, we must avenge Sinek." But the murderer was Ammonius. Where could they find him? There were two measures that could be taken. The first was for the high priest of the empire, Faust, to pray to Enlil on behalf of the empire, asking the great god to punish the evil gods of the foreign lands. The second measure was for the army to attack the city of Leng, destroy Ammon's shrine, occupy the land of the city, and turn the residents into slaves of the empire. The main generals who led the army to conquer the 6 cities of the kingdom of Babylon were all present, but none of them wanted to take on this task. Crossing the treacherous Assur highlands to launch an expedition was a strenuous task in itself. The non-combat losses of the army during the march were very high. Now that they had achieved success and gained a lot of wealth, territory, and slaves, no one wanted to take this risk. The battle between Enlil and Valletta had already shown that this battle was not going to be easy. Nearly half of the giant legion had died. Unless the other 4 elite legions of the empire were sent over, and a logistics team several times larger than usual, it would be difficult to win. If they had to fight, it was best to send someone else. This was what the generals were thinking, but no one dared to say it out loud. Lord Mantion's words were righteous, and even Samir couldn't refute him on the surface. This was the first problem she faced as soon as she took power. How could she face this kind of questioning? How could she avenge Emperor Sinek? If she didn't accept Lord Mantion's suggestion and take convincing measures, her prestige would be greatly affected, and her position as empress might not be stable. The officials all looked at the empress on the throne with different thoughts in their minds. Samir's face was as calm as still water, but no one could tell how he reacted. When Lord Mantion finished speaking, the officials had no choice but to express their support, lest they appear to be disloyal to the empire. Empress Samir nodded and said, Lord Mantion, I want to thank you for your efforts for the empire. You should be rewarded. Samir immediately gave the order to reward Lord Mantion with a new territory and hundreds of slaves. It seemed like a form of appeasement or compromise. After thanking the Empress, Lord Mantion said, Your Majesty, I don't want these rewards. I want to ask the Empire not to forget the hatred of Emperor Cynic and the glory we have protected. How do you plan to destroy Palace Ammonius? Samir replied calmly, The war with the Kingdom of Babylon has just ended, and the territories we have conquered need to be stabilized. Currently, the 4 legions can't be mobilized for expeditions. However, Lord Mantion's suggestion must also be considered. When it comes to the war with Lung, I know it better than all of you here, because both I and the sage imperial tutor personally went to the battlefield. At that time, we lost that battle, and Lung was only a Pyrrhic victory. Their losses were even greater than those of Enrol. The Empire's most elite giant legion has already been sent to the plains of Duk. If they can recover their peak combat strength, they will definitely be able to capture Lung and even conquer the entire plains of Duk. The other 4 legions have achieved such glorious results in attacking the Kingdom of Babylon, so why can't our most elite giant legion do the same? At present, the 2 most important things are confidence and strength. As for confidence, we have all seen it. Lord Mantion is full of confidence in the victory of Enrol, so all that's left is strength. From a strategic point of view, we need to organize more adequate logistical support, and we need to organize more soldiers to make up for the losses of the Giant Legion. I appoint the most loyal and talented minister of the Empire, Lord Mantion, to concurrently serve as the governor of Enrol, and he will be responsible for avenging His Majesty Cynic. Lord Mantion, I will send the most powerful mage of the Empire, Faust, to accompany you to Enrol, and I will give you full authority to organize logistics and recruit soldiers from the Assyrian Empire to expand the strength of Enrol. I feel the same way as you, and I even want to personally go to the battlefield like I did in the past, but I have to worry about more things in the Empire, so I entrust this important matter to you. The Empress actually made such a decision, sending a civil official to Enrol to preside over the military affairs. The reactions of the ministers varied. Some were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths, while others wanted to laugh but forced themselves to hold back. Lornard, on the other hand, was stunned on the spot. He had never expected that Samir would ask him to step up instead of another army from the Empire. He wanted to decline, but he had no excuse to do so. He was the one who was the happiest. Who else could they send if not him? Some ministers who were quick to react immediately praised Her Majesty's wise decision, and at the same time, praised Mantion's loyalty and bravery, and everyone else followed suit. Mantion had to go even if he didn't want to. He had built such a high platform for himself, and now he couldn't go back down. To replenish the Giant Legion and organize logistical reinforcements, manpower and material from the Assyrian mainland would need to be transferred across the plateau. No matter who did this, it would definitely violate the interests of a group of people. It was easy to get someone else to do it, but it was definitely a thankless task to do it personally. It would be fine if they could achieve a complete victory in the plains of Duk and obtain enough benefits, but if they failed or barely won, the losses would definitely outweigh the gains. Since Mantion was using this matter to make things difficult, Samir simply sent him to the front lines. Could a civil official from the Ministry of the Interior command an army in battle? In fact, the one who was really in control of the army on the battlefield was still Felix, the Giant Legion's commander. What Mantion could really be responsible for was the most troublesome logistics and people's livelihood. As for the military and political power, he couldn't control it, because Samir had also sent Faust. Chapter 255. Samir then gave a few more orders. She would bring Seneca's coffin back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, and the various legions would shift their focus to ensure the stability of the newly conquered city. The main generals would also follow Seneca's coffin back to Nineveh. After the state funeral, Lohud and Faust would rush to the city of Enrol. After that, Samir concluded her first court session and retreated to the back of the palace. Lohud stood in place for a long time without saying a word. When Prime Minister Alpha walked past him, he patted his shoulder and said, "Lord Lohud, you are the new hope of the empire. You are truly a master of both the pen and the sword. The whole nation is looking forward to your new achievements." Faust wanted to see Samir, but the palace servants told him that Her Majesty was tired and sad about the death of Emperor Cynic. She did not want to see anyone in private. Faust had no choice but to silently leave the palace. His residence in the city of Lys was, of course, the most luxurious room in the Enlil shrine, but this supreme mage was not willing to live in the shrine. Even when he passed by the Great Hall, he could not help but cast a magic that concealed his breath, deliberately avoiding the statue on the altar. He tried to comfort himself in his heart. Her Majesty the Empress sent him to Enlil City to let him avoid the divine temple. In Enrol he could live anywhere he wanted, and no one would dare to restrict him. But in the capital, as the chief high priest of the empire and the sage, he had to live in the main shrine and conduct all kinds of rituals in front of the statue of Enrol every day. When he faced the statue of Enrol, he naturally had a feeling of avoiding it. He even closed his mind so that when he prayed, even the gods could not hear his true thoughts. But on the other hand, Samir had sent him far away from the Saya Plateau. This was a form of alienation, as if Samir did not want to coexist with him in the capital. Although on the surface, Empress Tanuki showed enough respect for this sage imperial tutor and showed complete trust in him when it came to military affairs, it was all business as usual. Their personal relationship had not changed at all. That was the case on the surface, but Faust knew that Samir had been very tolerant of him, even deliberately sheltering him. Because of the assassination of Cynic, Faust, who was in charge of the magic formation at the time, had to bear the main responsibility. Everyone, including the supreme mage Diego Joe, did not blame Faust for using the air elemental armor. Instead, they were grateful to him for temporarily saving Seneca's life. It was also Faust who pleaded with Samir to spare the guards' lives. However, Faust knew what was going on. He did not necessarily need to use the air elemental armor to block that arrow. His more important goal at that time was to create an opportunity for Gilgamesh to assassinate him. Even if others didn't know the inside story, Queen Samir must have known, but she didn't say anything. She didn't even mention it. There were a few who questioned Faust for failing to protect King Cynic, but they were reprimanded and punished by the queen. Faust still couldn't figure out what kind of attitude Samir had towards him. Her Majesty knew that he had betrayed Cynic and deliberately allowed the assassin to get his hands on the secret that was enough to ruin his reputation, but she didn't punish him. She still allowed him to be the high and mighty sage of the nation. This was her kindness to him. However, Samir had sent Faust to Enrol to face a hopeless war that was destined to fail. Was this her punishment for him? On the way back to the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, following Seneca's coffin, Faust's heart was full of contradictions. In fact, Samir did not treat him coldly, nor did she treat him more intimately than before. But now, the situation had changed. Faust's thoughts and feelings had also changed. He felt that he was further away from the love in his heart, and everything he did was to get closer to it. Faust felt as if his soul had split into two parts, and he was talking to himself. He did bear the main responsibility for Seneca's death, but getting rid of this cruel emperor was his original intention. Now that he had succeeded, he should feel gratified. But why did the feeling of dissatisfaction in his heart grow stronger? The Assyrian Empire's strategy of consolidating and shrinking the front lines was formulated by Faust himself. Enrol was to be abandoned in the plan. This was also the strategy that Faust had proposed. Samir had also adopted his decision, so what was wrong with sending him to carry it out? The failure of Enlil City might affect the honor and reputation of the sage imperial preceptor who was at the front lines. Samuel had sent another scapegoat, Lowered, to take the blame for this future crime. This arrangement was enough to make Faust feel grateful. Since he had followed his heart's desire to assassinate Cynic and reverse the Assyrian Empire's national policy, what was there to be dissatisfied about? But Faust still felt pain. In the dark night, he asked himself, "Faust, Faust, you have not lost anything, and you have achieved your original intention. You have gotten rid of the cruel emperor and reversed the fate of the empire. Why are you getting more and more depressed?" When a seemingly impossible wish came true, the hidden desires in his heart began to sprout. Things that he had never thought about before, even though he knew it was impossible, began to sprout like hopeless seeds. After returning to the city of Nineveh, before the state funeral of Emperor Cynic, Faust, who lived in the main shrine of the empire, endured an inexplicable torment in his heart every night. It was as if the brand left by Satan in his soul was burning him. He was thinking about Samir, but the image of Samir seemed to have become abstract and blurry, becoming the shadow of many women. Her charming smile and delicate body were even accompanied by moans and gasps, causing Faust to shudder. On the other hand, he could not stand the existence of the statue of Enrol in the shrine. Although he was not in front of the statue, he knew that the statue was watching everything in the shrine. Samir lived deep in the palace, and Faust had no other opportunity to see her except for routine court discussions. This was normal, because Her Majesty was keeping vigil for Cynic. At this sensitive time, it was not appropriate for her to make any abnormal movements. This made Faust feel inexplicably anxious. Finally, one night, he quietly left the shrine as if he was escaping from something. He disguised himself and appeared in a luxurious brothel in Nineveh. A 9th-level supreme mage was traveling in disguise, so naturally, there would be no flaws. The girls did not know that this white-haired old man with a face full of wrinkles was the respected sage of the empire. Faust was very rich, so he was very generous. The girls were overjoyed, wishing that they could do everything in their power to serve him as he flew to the top of the clouds. Faust was a 9th-level supreme mage in his 50s, but his body was actually as strong as a young man in his early 20s. His youthful vigor that had never been vented before erupted for the first time. He drank a lot of wine and experienced an unprecedented indulgence in his life. He woke up before dawn. He played with the beautiful naked bodies of the 10 girls in the fragrant pavilion and placed glittering parangons between their thighs, on their bellies, and in their cleavage. Then he quietly returned to the shrine. No one found out what the sage had done during the night. The next morning, there was a routine sacrificial ceremony, presided over by Faust. The chief high priest of the empire stood by the altar and chanted sacred hymns, but he was completely absent-minded. He felt that he was being absurd, and that everything that happened last night was just a boring emptiness. But when night fell again, he fell into the entanglement of emptiness again. There seemed to be a voice in his soul saying, "Faust, why do you have to do this?" So he quietly left the shrine to find his nightlife. Although the respected sage was the most knowledgeable man in the Assyrian Empire, he had little experience in visiting brothels. Once the floodgates of desire were opened, it was difficult to restrain them. He always went to the same brothel, which was large and luxurious. He was always generous, and the girls were naturally beautiful and charming. Such customers were most welcome in the brothel, but there was one thing that Faust went too far with. Perhaps he did not rely on his wealth, or perhaps he did not even realize how generous he was, but simply indulged himself. Almost all the most beautiful girls in the brothel had accompanied him, and during the days of national mourning for Emperor Cynic, they had spent one passionate night after another. People did not know Faust's identity, only that he was an unattractive little old man, but he spent money in the brothel and had many beautiful girls accompany him every night. Later on, Faust no longer rotated a different batch of girls every day. At least he had his eye on one of them, and for many days he had her accompany him every night. This was because the girl's facial features vaguely resembled Samir, but she appeared so delicate, and always had a timid and melancholy look. No matter how much money Faust gave her, this girl could not smile at him from the bottom of her heart like other girls. When he took her, he could even feel the trembling and resistance in her heart, and this aroused Faust's desire even more. She was like a flower that needed his nourishment and care. He played in the brothel like this, and no one knew his identity. Sooner or later, he would stir up trouble. Not long after, Faust stirred up trouble, and the cause of it was this girl. There was a young general in the empire who used to frequent this brothel, and some time ago he followed the army into battle. During this time, he returned to the capital with the wealth he gained from the battlefield, and often came to find this girl. In the end, for several days, he heard that the girl was accompanying a little old man. A general who had killed countless people on the battlefield would not have a good temper. Finally, one night, he could not help but call the owner of the brothel to discuss with the customer that he was willing to pay a large sum of money to get the girl to accompany him. But the little old man did not even pay attention to him, not giving him any face as a hero of the empire who had killed countless enemies. So, he got drunk and rushed into the room where Faust was. Although it was said that when a warrior faced a mage, a sudden close combat would be more threatening, but it also depended on what kind of warrior faced what kind of mage. Of course, Faust did not bring his staff, and had drunk a little too much. He did not even lift his eyelids from the bed, and with just a gentle wave of his hand, the 6th-level warrior was sent flying through the side wall and injured. This time, the mess was big. A group of soldiers who were on good terms with the general heard the news and came to settle the score with the little old man, but Faust was nowhere to be found. The owner of the brothel also could not tell where the mysterious and rich little old man came from. As a result, a group of meritorious soldiers who had returned triumphantly from the battlefield tore down one of the brothel's fragrant pavilions, smashed many things, and injured several people. Even the capital's garrison guards were alarmed. This happened 2 days before Cynic was officially buried in the tombs of the Assyrian emperors. Prime Minister Alpha was deeply enraged and ordered the troublemakers to be severely punished and investigated. The soldiers who had caused trouble had all been dealt with, but where could they go to find that little old man Mao? According to the description, the little old man looked a bit like the sage imperial teacher, but when someone said this, he quickly slapped his own mouth and repeatedly explained that he did not mean to offend him. Interestingly, Amon had also caused trouble in a courtyard in Montefiore, and used this as a pretext to make a fuss. But Faust was different. When he sobered up, he immediately left. It was impossible for him to reveal his identity and cause a ruckus like Amon. He couldn't even let his name leak out, otherwise it would be one of the biggest scandals in the empire in recent times. The reputation and prestige of the sage imperial preceptor had become his betrayal. Faust never went to the brothel again, nor did he see the girl again. 3 days later, he rushed to the city of Enrol with the Minister of the Interior, Lord Loward. After arriving in Enrol, Faust did not live in the shrine, but in the temporary palace that Samir had stayed in. Enlil City doesn't have any brothels, and this sage imperial tutor also felt that his actions in the past few days were absurd. It was as if he didn't know who he was, and he definitely didn't want to mention it again. But every time night came, he felt his soul become even more desolate. He had been used to praying for so many years, but now he did not know who to pray to. He did not want to talk about his experience, but he could not help but think about it. When the girl saw him wave his hand and hit the general who had barged in, her expression was not one of admiration or worship, but one of unconcealable fear. Even her soft body became stiff. He saw his own appearance in the mirror, his face full of wrinkles, and thought of how the general who had barged in was so young and handsome. Perhaps the girl's heart really liked that kind of man? He inexplicably began to pray again, but it was not to call on the gods. "O Suxian, it was you who said, 'My desire is the ruler, and the power you guide is its servant.' Please tell me, Samir knew my feelings but still stayed away from me. Was it because I was not young and handsome enough? Was it because that kind of appearance could attract a woman?" Unexpectedly, he actually heard Sudan's response. "I cannot answer this question, because you cannot decide whether she will fall in love with you or what she is attracted to. But all of this is never without a reason. You can only decide what kind of charm you have. Perhaps you should pray to the god of youth and love, but as far as I know, everything is still up to you. I guide you to a power that can restore your youthful and handsome appearance, and it is not an information jar that can be seen through." This time, it was the real Amon who was speaking. When Faust returned to Enrol, Amon also returned to the plains of Duk. He heard Faust's prayer to Sudan, and gave an answer in his soul. At the same time, he also guided Faust's origin power, and also pointed out a special kind of transformation magic. This kind of transformation magic couldn't change a person's life, nor could it turn Faust into another race. However, Faust had enough magic power to show a youthful and handsome appearance when he verified the origin of power from the beginning. In fact, this was a kind of magic to assist in the training of body arts, and it could reshape the bloodline, but the prerequisite was that Faust had to pass tests such as the purity of the body, the purity of the bloodline, the breakthrough of the limit, and so on. Aman left Babylon City 2 months after the death of Hammurabi II. His whereabouts were very secretive, and he blended into the caravan of Nesket and Lee, sitting in a very ordinary carriage, accompanied by Wendy. People only knew that the man and the woman were relatives of Nesket and Lee, and that they were going to follow the caravan to Valin. They did not know that they were Ammonius and the former adoratress of Babylon. Some people were happy, while others were sad. For the great merchant of Uruk, Nesket, and Lee, it was really the end of the bitterness and the beginning of the happiness. He had originally set up a business in Marduk City, and cooperated with Madanzo to smuggle military supplies through wandering explorers, including horses, armor, and weapons. At the same time, he also did a business of lending, which was very profitable. So the merchant saw the opportunity and increased his investment, and his business in Marduk City grew bigger and bigger. Not only did it include the smuggling business with Valang, but the newly built Marduk City itself also needed the support of commercial trade. The mayor, Usser, once held a banquet to entertain Nesket, who came to inspect the business, and praised him verbally, promising to find an opportunity to commend his contributions and fight for a noble status for him. But all these beautiful prospects were destroyed by a war. Due to the sudden invasion of the Assyrian Empire from the northeast, the army led by Vanajingzi had to urgently retreat from the west bank of the Euphrates River. Marduk City was broken through by the Hittite army and renamed to Budamia. The mayor of Marduk City also disappeared, and Nesket and Lee suffered heavy losses. The most profitable business was gone, and the title of nobility was even more out of the question. The merchant actually lost a lot of weight. He envied Scio in Montefiore City. Because he made friends with Ammonius during the war, Scio was now not only one of the top merchants in Lower Igut, but also the deputy director of the Department of Property of Montefiore City. He had the title of nobility and was allowed to buy a large piece of land. And his talent in business was no less than that of Scio. Why was he so unlucky? Chapter 256. Of course, this was also Amon's idea. Before Amon left Babylon City, he had discussed some matters with Binut. He wanted to restore trade between Babylon City and the Kingdom of Babylon. Amon had obtained a large sum of money in Babylon City, and this money was useless in his hands. He should organize the most urgently needed goods to be transported to Babylon City. Now, if he wanted to open trade with Babylon City, he needed the permission of the Hittite kingdom to pass through Budamia City. This could be discussed between the Kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite kingdom. Restoring trade would benefit both sides. Of course, the experienced Nesket was the best candidate to restore trade, and so Nesket and his career soared overnight. He rushed to the capital to thank Binut I, who encouraged him to set an example and restore trade with the Hittite kingdom and the plains of Duk. The relationship between the two countries had now eased, and this was also a policy adjustment made by Binut after he succeeded to the throne. First, he admitted his weak position after the defeat, and then focused on restoring the people's livelihood and economy. Nesket had become the new lordly of the kingdom, and his caravan would naturally be given special care, and there were generally no checks when entering or leaving the border. But Nesket was a merchant, and he was very good at doing things. Whenever his caravan carried goods that might be prohibited, he would give some benefits to the officials and soldiers at the border, and would not use his status to oppress people. The caravan that Amon followed was already the fourth caravan that Nesket had sent to Babylon City. He did not follow the first caravan back to Babylon City because he did not want to attract too much attention. The journey was indeed uneventful. Wendy was like a bird released from its cage, lifting the curtain to look at the outside world. Anything could make her happy. With a smile, Aman told Wendy that if she was good at gardening, she could go to a divine palace called the Garden of Eden to do what she liked. If she preferred to stay in Babylon, Aman would also make arrangements. When Aesop and George saw Aman come back safe and sound, they were naturally very surprised. But when they saw the beautiful Wendy beside Aman, they were very surprised. They had wanted to discuss matters with the god in the palace of Ammonius, but the carriage took a sudden turn and went to the town in the city where the Dushians lived. They temporarily placed Wendy in the small building where Maya had lived, and then went to the backyard of Aman's home to talk to the god. Aman gave a brief account of his experiences during this period of time and handed over a huge sum of wealth to Aesop in a spatial magic tool. Aesop naturally wouldn't use the spatial artifact, so he let George keep it for the time being. He exclaimed, "Oh my God, you're really omnipotent. You've saved Tulingcheng's life. Now we don't lack manpower or material resources to evacuate Lung, but we lack money." George smiled and said, "My Ammonius, the more time I spend with you, the more I admire you from the bottom of my heart. This is really a miracle that no one can imagine. You actually brought the adoratress from the gate of the divine Babylon. Wendy is not here. Let me ask you in private, how are you going to arrange for her? Do you want to tell Murin?" Aman glared at George and replied, "You underestimate a god. Do you think she doesn't know? Wendy is a very capable girl. She won't live here for nothing. As for whether she wants to stay in Tulingcheng or go to the Garden of Eden, you have to ask her." Just now, Aesop said that we don't lack manpower or material resources, but now the scale of Tulingcheng is much larger than before. Lord Aesop is overworking himself. What we really lack are talents to govern the city. Aesop hurriedly added, "It's not that I'm overworking myself, it's what I should do and I'm willing to do. I just wanted to tell you something. 2 very capable people came to Tulingcheng not long ago. I want to put them in an important position, but their identities are very special, and I was just about to ask for your opinion." Aman asked with great interest, "Who are they to receive such a high evaluation from Lord Aesop?" George replied with a smile, "Ammonius, they're both old acquaintances of yours. One is the former lord of Marduk, Usser, and the other is the former chief quartermaster of the Babylon army, Dikairo. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the 2 of them fled in the chaos and ended up being prisoners of war among the defeated soldiers of the Uruk Legion. Their identities were well hidden and they were never recognized. Later on, the 1,000 or so Uruk Legion prisoners were sent to Tulingcheng by Princess Cilia and Lord Goliath, and they were recognized by Madanzo. So it's these 2. They really are old acquaintances of Aman, and they're both very capable. Dikairo used to be the mayor of Akkad, a small town in the state of Kish in the kingdom of Babylon. During the rescue mission of Princess Sisela, he had accomplished a seemingly impossible task, demonstrating his outstanding organizational skills and political talent. At that time, both Prince Binut and Princess Sisela appreciated him very much, and both wanted to recruit him for their own use. Prince Binut acted even faster, promoting him to the city of Kish. Later on, when Prince Binut gained control of the army, he promoted him to chief quartermaster. As for Usser, he was the leader of the Highland giant tribe that kidnapped Princess Sisela. It was indeed not easy for him to organize the Highland giants, who were all brawn and no brains, into a coordinated operation. Later on, he built the city of Marduk in the southeast corner of the plains of Duk, which was more than enough to prove his ability to govern a city. However, Usser and Aman still had some history. He had once stopped the Dushians from returning to their hometown under the orders of Marduk. After the city of Marduk was breached by the Hittite army, the 2 of them fled to the banks of the Babylon River, but before they could cross the river, they were captured by the Hittite army and the Uruk Legion that followed. They mixed in with the Uruk Legion prisoners of war and became Hittite slaves, but their identities were not exposed. Gilgamesh once asked Goliath and Aman for help in rescuing the Uruk Legion prisoners of war. Later, under the mediation of Goliath and Princess Sisela, these prisoners of war became slaves bestowed by the king of Hittite to the cold Prince Aman. At the same time, Uruk also paid the Hittite army a nominal sum of money at a very low price, and brought these more than 1,000 people to Uruk. According to Amon's intention, they should be given freedom and be allowed to decide whether to stay or leave, but Aesop very much hoped that this group of people would stay. The Uruk Legion was once the most powerful legion on the continent. These people were prisoners of war from this legion, and if they were incorporated into the Uruk Legion and trained a little, they would be able to burst out with powerful combat power. So Aesop provided very generous conditions. First, he conveyed the oracle of Ammonius, announcing that they had regained their freedom, and promised that as long as they were willing to stay and swear loyalty to the city of Salem, they would be given fertile land, farm tools, food seeds, and building materials. A few hundred of them chose to return to the city of Uruk, while the other half stayed. Among the people who stayed, Madanzo occasionally found Usser and Tich. Usser did not return to Babylon because he did not dare to go back. Benut, who first grasped the power of the kingdom and later ascended the throne, was modest but tough, and some of his policies were quite harsh and not negotiable. He once issued an order that if the people fled in the face of an enemy attack, they would not be held accountable, but if the city lords and garrison generals fled without permission, they would be executed and all their property confiscated. Even Benut's trusted aides could not be pardoned. Of the 6 cities that were captured by the Assyrian army, 1 city lord died in battle, 2 surrendered and were captured, and the other 3 fled before the Assyrian army arrived. As a result, they were all executed by Prince Benut in front of everyone, and then he issued the following order. Usser was also a city lord who had escaped. Although it was because the city was breached, he did not receive Prince Benut's order to retreat. There was a reason for it, and he had tried his best, but he still could not escape punishment. Moreover, Princess Sisela had left, and he had lost his backer in the political world of the kingdom, so he naturally did not want to return to Babylon. As for Tich, he happened to be in the city of Marduk at that time, and he was ordered to temporarily help Usser defend the city. Although he was also responsible, Benut I may not punish him severely, but he himself did not want to go back. The former mayor had a kind of aristocratic pride in his bones. Being defeated and captured was a kind of humiliation for him, and it was the freedom that the city of Selling gave him. According to aristocratic etiquette, he should swear allegiance to the city of Selling, so he chose to stay. After hearing this, Ammon smiled and said, "Aesop, in fact, either one of these 2 people has the ability to govern a city. Congratulations on having 2 capable assistants. They are fully capable of serving as the director of the city, and you will also be able to relax a lot." Now that Ammon had become a god, he rarely interfered with the mundane affairs of the human world. After attaining the realm of transcendence and immortality, his perspective and mentality had also become detached. After a brief chat, he let Aesop deal with it himself. When Wendy asked Ammon where she wanted to go, she did not hesitate to answer the Garden of Eden. The girl's idea was very interesting to Ammon. She hoped to return to the human world in the gate of the divine god, but after seeing the real god Ammon, and hearing that there was a divine palace in the human world, she naturally wanted to go to the Garden of Eden. Ammon asked George to send Wendy to the Garden of Eden first, and told the disciples to wait in the Garden of Eden. He would arrive in a few days, and once again disappeared in front of the mortals. Of course, Ammon wanted to go back to the Garden of Eden, but he did not want to walk with George and Wendy, which could easily expose his whereabouts. And Enrol must be paying attention to his whereabouts at all times, so it was not the time to lure the fish to the bait. And it was during this time that Faust came to Enrol again, heard Sudan's voice, and gave him the latest guidance of power. Wendy entered the Garden of Eden for the first time, and the amazement in her heart was almost indescribable. She never dreamed that there was such a beautiful, peaceful, and magical world in the world. In her mind, this was the kingdom of heaven where the gods lived. Since ancient times, those who could enter the divine palace of the gods in the human world were the oracles guided by the gods. Generally, they could only enter the divine palace when they were about to master the 8th level of the power of origin and pass the test of losing power. Without exception, they were all great achievers in the human world. As for the disciples, some of them had entered the Garden of Eden before reaching this realm, and they were considered exceptions. Of course, People like Wendy who could enter the divine palace without any training were the exceptions among the exceptions. In the Garden of Eden, the disciples of Ammon were also quite welcoming and took care of Wendy, an ordinary girl in the human world, because she was Ammonius' woman. Whether it was or not, Ammon had lived with her in the gate of God for so long, and he had abducted the former adoratress of Baron from Marduk's place, and ordered George to personally send her to the Garden of Eden. Didn't he have to go? He couldn't deny it even if he wanted to. The disciples also pondered in their hearts, Murin probably wouldn't be happy to see Ammon do this, but this was something for the gods themselves to worry about, and the disciples couldn't interfere. And for Wendy, the days spent in the Garden of Eden were the happiest of her life. The people here were so beautiful, handsome, happy, and kind, and they all called themselves angels. And there was a big difference between them and mortals. They all had wings. Ammon hadn't been back for half a year, so why did the disciples all have wings and even call themselves angels? The story had to start with Michael and Seagull. Seagull's injuries had healed under Cecilia's careful treatment, and he returned to the Garden of Eden. He had once transformed into a giant bird on the battlefield. The scene was very dazzling, and he had achieved unexpected results. Ammon had taught Faust a form of transformation magic to reconstruct the bloodline, and his disciples naturally knew it too. Later, Seagull didn't want to always transform into a giant bird, so he cultivated a pair of wings that could appear at any time and could display all kinds of magical powers, looking very impressive. These wings were originally the wings of a seagull, with some gray spots at the tips. Once he left the Garden of Eden and flew to the city of Meso to see Cecilia, and showed this pair of wings, but Cecilia said that pure white looked better. As a result, when he returned to the Garden of Eden, the wings had become very beautiful pure white, like a luxurious cloak behind him. Link felt that Seagull's appearance was very cool, even cooler than the always cool Madanzo, so he also cultivated such wings. The rest of the disciples also felt that this kind of cultivation was very interesting, so everyone cultivated pure white wings. Madanzo passed the test of endless arising and ceasing cycle and became a 9th-level divine emissary, and Gabriel passed this test almost at the same time as him. In fact, Gabriel had already vaguely comprehended this state of mind after the fall of Sanctus Maria, and after the battle of Talang and Enril City, he really comprehended this state of mind. She also went to the Garden of Eden to cultivate and became a 9th-level divine emissary. According to the customs of the various divine clans in the continent, 9th-level divine emissaries were already called gods on earth, but in their hearts, Ammon was the only god who guided their faith. So the disciples discussed one thing together: if one of them achieved the realm of eternal life in the future, how should they call themselves? As a result, everyone learned from the current practice of the Ennead and unanimously decided that no matter what realm they reached, they would call themselves angels. Later, some people saw the pure white wings of the angels and thought they were the wings of white pigeons, but in fact, they were the wings of seagulls. As the leader of Ammon's disciples, Madanzo's wings were different, and when he spread his wings, he did not look like a big white pigeon, but more like a blazing firebird. Madanzo had always liked to have a cool image, and even when he became a 9th-level divine emissary, this temper did not change. He had seen the god of fire of the Anunnaki divine clan and felt that the appearance of that flame was very arrogant, and had long vowed that one day he would overshadow the limelight of the god of fire. He also told Link and the others that he was the captain of Ammonius' guards and had led 36 generals of the guards, and now that he had become a 9th-level divine emissary, when he cultivated 36 fire wings, it would represent the perfection of his magic power and realm, and he would usher in the test of transcending eternal life. And Link teased him, saying that when the time came, he would be like a chicken on fire. Just half a month after Wendy arrived in the Garden of Eden, Ammonius finally met the disciples again. He didn't fly to this place. Instead, like a wandering hunter, he crossed the Euphrates Valley on foot. Even the gods couldn't detect his presence. But one goddess seemed to have a premonition, and as soon as Ammon stepped into the Garden of Eden, before he could say a few words to the disciples, Murin arrived with the elf maid Shubra. The disciples hurried to welcome the goddess of youth and love, while Aman stepped forward and gave the goddess a gentle and warm hug, saying softly, "You Nam Na, I finally see you again." In front of the disciples, Murin gave Aman face, holding his arm with a coquettish and reserved smile, and greeted the divine emissaries in the Garden of Eden. After letting go of Aman's hand, she took Wendy's hand and exclaimed, "You are that girl, right? The adoratress of Baron who was brought out of the divine gate by Aman." In front of another god, Wendy was still a little timid. But the legendary goddess of youth and love had always been worshipped by the women on the continent, and now she was standing in front of her, looking so familiar. Wendy felt like she was dreaming. She raised her head and replied, "I am no longer the adoratress of Baron, I am Wendy." "Thank you, Aman, and thank you, my goddess." Murin took Wendy's hand and asked her for a long time. In front of the goddess, the innocent girl answered all her questions respectfully. Then Murin asked Shubra to talk to Wendy, introducing her to the divine palace of Murin, which was also what Aman called Yun Namna's Rose Garden. The goddess claimed that she had something important to discuss with Aman, and called Aman alone to the belly of the mountain where he usually cultivated. The goddess was, after all, a goddess. It was obvious that she was not happy that Aman brought Wendy back, and there was nothing to hide between the gods. But she did not pull Aman's ear and shout like the women in the mortal world, "You devil! I was worried about you at home, but you were fooling around outside." Instead, she sat there and looked at Aman, and said in a faint tone, "I heard that you were hurt by the god of flame and the god of ash. Enril must have seen through you. He will definitely find a chance to kill you, and you still have the leisure to do so?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.